All right. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to Tone Talk. Thanks for joining Tone Talk with Mark Uzansky and Dave Friedman. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing good today, I think.
Me too. I think I'm doing all right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm still. Do I have to subscribe to see this? Because it still says, or do I have to click play or what?
No, you don't have to click anything.
It's delayed.
All right. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
It'll take about 20 seconds. So, welcome another amazing guest this week, Steven Fryette. Thank you so much for joining.
Hey, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate you taking the time, and Dave, thanks for setting it up. And this is great. So, you guys, I guess, go way back. How do you guys know each other?
oh my God.
Let's see. Actually, we know each other from Brauer Rentals.
Oh, so that's way back.
And Dave was, I think, a dispatcher at the time, and I was working. I think I had just left.
No.
I had just left Music Tech, the repair place,
Mm-hmm.
and
when we first met, you were still working at Music Tech. I remember that was when you first did the very first VHT prototype Power Amp 2150 in that raw metal, and you were still working there when we first met. And
yeah,
then you quit.
that was the very end. That was the very end of it.
Yep.
I was just starting. I was just starting VHT and Music Tech was overlapping with that. So I had built the prototypes there and in my apartment. So I think I had brought the Pitfall prototype over to Brauer's because he wanted to hear it, and the power amps didn't exist yet. So that was a year before the company officially started, right? And then everybody said, "Can you make a power amp only of that?" And I went, "Yeah, I think so." And so I think I went right to the junk store and bought a bunch of parts, and I called up a transformer supplier that I'd been dealing with at Music Tech, and the reason we were dealing with a transformer supplier at Music Tech is because we were buying a lot of transformers to rewire gray market keyboards that were coming from Japan, digital keyboard synthesizers, DX7s and that kind of thing. There was because of the way because of the exchange rate between the dollar and the yen, people were just like going to Japan like crazy and bringing back gray market 100-volt keyboards by the truckload. And they were driving all the dealers crazy, and we were one of the shops that were making a custom domestic transformer to swap out the 100-volt transformer in those so they could sell them locally. And so we had a relationship with the transformer supplier already. So I had them make me some prototype transformers. And that supplier was a family-owned operation. It was a father and a son and a grandson. And the father was real old school and knew all about tubes, and I told him what I wanted, and he said, "Yeah, I can do that, no problem." So he made me some prototypes, and then I built the first 2150 prototype kind of over a weekend with a bunch of spare parts and these transformers. And I remember we had talked about I was going to do this power amp of the Pitfall, which had 4 EL34s. And I'm still not seeing anything on the screen yet. I'm still seeing just the logo. Let me interrupt for a sec.
Oh, really?
What am I doing? Yeah. I'm on the YouTube page, and it's just showing me the logo. I'm seeing the live chat part, but the logo is just sitting there, blank.
Maybe hit refresh.
Hit refresh. That did it. Yeah. Okay.
Hey, there you go. So I can do the same thing.
Wow. Look at me, Mr. Technical.
The wonders, the wonders of modern technology, right?
That's like the go-to fix. Hit refresh.
Just, did you turn it off and on again?
Yeah, reboot it.
Reboot.
All right, cool. It worked.
Didn't work for me.
No, you don't see anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. I don't care.
Okay.
Wow, that is quite a delay. You said that's a 20-second delay?
I think 20, 30-second delay. I'm just guessing, but it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, as I was saying, what was I saying? Oh,
the Transformers.
Yeah, when I went to build it, I remember thinking that 8 EL34s was a heck of a lot of EL34s. And they were going to draw so much heater current. The transformer was going to have to be huge, and it was going to be a lot of sockets. And I just thought, you know, I could actually do the same thing with half as many tubes and use KT88s. And so that's what I did. And I brought it back, the working one, and everyone went, wow, it sounds great. Why did you use KT88s? And I just said, first, because it was, at that time, KT88s weren't much a different price than EL34s, and they were actually GE 6550s. Now that I think about it, and I had a really good relationship with a local tube supplier that was also the master distributor for GE, and so as I transitioned, so as that was national, and as I transitioned into the company, I kept that relationship with that supplier that I was buying tubes from at Valley Arts and at Music Tech. So they were really helpful in hooking me up with, actually directly hooking me up with engineers at GE Tube Factory, which by then was called MPD, Microwave Products Division. And I had been hearing rumbling that they were going to cease production of the 6550s. And so I just asked the engineer flat out, are you going to stop making these 6550s? And if so, when? And he kind of hemmed and hawed. And I went, okay, that sounds like you're not trying not to say yes and trying not to say no. And he says, well, we just really don't know. We're running another 50,000. And we don't know if we're going to run another 50,000 after that, but our typical production run is 50,000. So we're going to do one, and depending on the demand or depending on how the tooling holds up, we may or may not do another one. So I said, well, based on your current sales, how long is 50,000 going to last you? And he says, it could be, 2 years. And I went, all right, I'm comfortable with that. So I went ahead and used them. And the idea was that they were just, since they were close in price to the EL34s, it was half this maintenance expense to buy 4 of those than 8 EL34s, and I just thought that would be beneficial. Plus, I thought they would hold up better on the road, so I did it that way, and everybody seemed to like it, and off it went.
Well, and that was the Pitfall, you said, the preamp or the power amp?
That was the 2150 power amp, which was spawned by the Pitbull head prototype that I had made.
Gotcha.
And everybody seemed to like the Pitbull head, but what they really were reacting to was the idea of the power amp, because at that point, racks were really taking hold, and Brauer was really involved in that, and Dave was getting involved in that, and everybody just seemed to want to go rack. And I'd been doing some rack stuff with, because Lukather was a client when I was at Valley Arts, and Buzzy Featon was a client when I was at Valley Arts. And so all these guys, Carlos Rios and all these guys, were clients from Valley Arts that stuck with me, or other clients that I developed at Music Tech, and they were all big pedal board guys when pedal boards were huge in the late 70s, 79, 80. It was pedal board mania at that time. and everybody was just trying to modularize their systems. They weren't really trying to make big refrigerators that they could jam 8 million effects in. They were really just trying to modularize everything and make it portable, because of all those guys were just doing mega sessions, multiple sessions a day. Some of those guys would do 5 or 6, 7 sessions a day. They were just maddening, and they needed to have multiple rigs, and that's where Brauer came in, and other cartridge companies like them, because they would have to have cartridge guys. You know, a session ends, downbeat at the next studio in Hollywood in an hour.
Oh, how I remember.
Had to get gear. Yeah, they either had to get gear from the first session to the second one immediately in time for downbeat, or they had to have a B rig so that they would have some gear overlap so that they could make it. And they were making good enough money then that they could afford, a gear overlap like that. So it was really started out with a rack for a power amp and a rack with a couple of preamps in it and a couple of effects things, and mix and match. And for this session, I'll use this power amp and those preamps and this pedal board. And so it was all modular. And then it just started getting more cohesive. We started putting all the stuff together in one big back-breaking box with wheels on it. And it was at that point, it was kind of driven by producers, really. It was like, well, for this session, and you would go to the session, and then the producer would tell you what he wanted, because those guys, they just had the work. It didn't really matter what style, because they could all play whatever styles were required. And it didn't really matter what gear, because they all had the good gear. So it was just, instead of the producer trying to tell them what kind of sounds they wanted or what kind of gear, it's just like, we got this artist, downbeats at 10, blah, 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 blah. So they started making more complex self-contained racks with tons of stuff in it. So when they got there, then the producer would go, I want this kind of sound, and then I want that kind of sound, and they just had it all there. And that's where all the switching stuff came from, and that's where all the modular stuff came from. And coalescing the racks into a single unit came from, just to make it all a sound on demand, whatever the producer wanted for this particular session.
Yeah,
it sounds like today now they just pull out a Kemper.
Oh God.
Right, exactly. And there were a lot of amps, and there were some new modern amps that were coming out, and Rivera was out there, and Soldano was out, and there was people that were modifying Marshalls, and so there was a lot of that already. The Pitfall head was cool and people liked it, but it wasn't making everybody go, oh, that's just like blows everything away. It was just like, that's a very cool, that's a different sound, I like it, it's a different thing, great.
Had its niche,
but it wasn't really it wasn't really the standout thing. When the power amp, when I showed everybody the power amp, it was like, okay, there's nothing like this anywhere.
Right.
And for any amount of money. And that's what really happened. Is it just, even Randy Smith came to me at our first NAMM show, and I've known Randy of Mesa. I'd known him already for years because I had been a warranty service station for Mesa on the West Coast since I started at Valley Arts. So 5 or almost 10 years. So we had a long running relationship. And he came over to the booth and he goes, this industry just drives me nuts sometimes. We've been making power amps that people say they want them neutral, they want them flat, they don't want any tone controls, they don't want this, they don't want that. And then you come along and put KT88s in the thing and presence and depth controls, and now you're like the darling of the industry. And he was kind of like congratulating me and mad at the same time.
Right.
It was really funny.
Why don't you go back a little bit though, and just start way back in your career, and let's hear the story, because we kind of jumped ahead a bit, maybe.
Yeah. Take us back, and then we'll jump to some questions afterward.
I was a drummer in Seattle after high school, which is 70. I graduated in 71, and I had a job in a music store on the east side. It's called the East Side, which is east of, Bellevue, a little east of Bellevue, there was Bandstand Music, which was a big music store in Bellevue. And then a little east of that was another pretty big music store called Bandwagon. And I got a job there after high school. And I was starting to go to college, and I started out with a music major, and then I decided to switch to electronics, and then I got bored with both of them and dropped out. And I was working at the music store, and I already had some technical ability because I'd been into electronics since I was a little kid, 8, 9, 10, tearing radios apart, fixing things for neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Had a lawnmower.
Whatever.
My mom, when she vacuumed, she would yank the cable out of the wall to go to the next room, and she would always pull the cable out of the plug, and it would short out and blow a fuse. And finish the house until your father comes home. And I went, I can fix that. And I fixed the cord end, and she was like, don't touch that. It's electricity is dangerous. And I said, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? A little smoke will come out. And I didn't really have any fear of that. So I just dove in. And so I did the same thing at the music store. I was basically a sales manager, and kind of earned the trust of the owner and started managing the place. And I started tinkering around with the repair guy left, and we didn't have anybody to do repairs. And I went, well, I can do that. And we started getting in, and every other one. And so I just got thrown into the trenches. I had to fix all these amps, and they were little minor problems, and they were repetitive problems. So after the first one or two, it was like, I know what's going to happen. I know what the problem is going to be, and I know what the fix is. So I got the repairs quickly because I already knew what I was confronting. And the store owner was pretty impressed with that. And so I just started getting a reputation for being able to fix stuff. And then I was playing in bands, and all around Seattle and Oregon and Idaho and Montana and Vancouver and Alaska, and mostly cover bands and some original material. And when the disco scene started taking over in the Pacific Northwest, I moved to Los Angeles because some friends of mine had moved down here, and they already had a band doing cover gigs, and they were making good money, and the scene in Seattle for guitar music was dead. So they called me and told me to come down there. So I did that. And so I was making great money playing 6 nights a week. And that wanted to start playing original music. I realized there's no money in original music unless you make it. Yeah. So got a day job, and I got a dumb day job that wouldn't take any of my brain, just like a messenger service gig, just driving paperwork around for a title insurance company or something like that. And played gigs and rehearsed like crazy. And in the process of doing music, I wanted to move into a nicer place. I wanted to move to Hollywood. I was living on the outside. I was living down by the airport. It was a funky place. It was cheap, $75 a month.
Oh, geez.
And actually, I was, and that was sharing. That was with a roommate. So it was $37.50 a month.
Oh my God.
Each.
That was a long time ago. That shows your age right there, babe.
Oh yeah.
Talking early 70s.
And it was a rough neighborhood, man. There was this like there was a phone booth on the corner where my apartment was that people were getting shot in all the time. And there was drug busts outside my window. I mean, it was a rough neighborhood, but it worked for a while. And then, so I needed to make a little bit more money, and I wanted to start buying some better gear. And so I started looking around in the local ads for a repair gig. And there was 2 repair gigs. One was this little music store in the Valley, never heard of, and the other one was Valley Arts, which I had heard of. And I was totally intimidated by that because Valley Arts was the hub. That was like where all the stuff was happening. That's where all the major players were hanging out. That's where they were getting their guitars, getting their amps modified. Rivera was there, and that was just the nadir of the scene. There was Guitar Center and there was a couple other music stores and stuff, but Valley Arts was where all the groundbreaking stuff was happening. That's where everybody was pushing the envelope. And dare go audition for that gig, because I just thought, oh, those guys are gonna find me out. You know, I'm seat of the pants. I know electronic theory. I've been inside of stuff. I'm not afraid to work on anything, but I just figured I'd walk in there and they would throw heavy duty technical questions and schematics and ask me to read them and do all this stuff. And I just figured I wasn't going to cut it. So I didn't even try. I went to the other place and the guy really needed somebody. And I just basically said, I'm a hunt and peck. I'm learning as I go. I know a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff I don't know, but I said I can cut the gig. And he went, well, I'll give you a shot. So I started working there, and it turned out to be a lot easier than I thought. And he was pretty impressed. But I didn't like working for the place. It was during the summer that I started working there, and he would not turn the air conditioner on in the building. And it was during the summer, and it was always 110, 120 in there. And I was like, turn on the air conditioner, man. I can't even concentrate. And he's like, it's expensive. After he asked me to come in on a Sunday, and he would not turn on the air conditioner again. And I just said, that's it. I'll work on a Sunday. I'll work late on weeknights if you want, but I will not work in a sweat box. I just won't do it. And I went back and got the paper that had the ads in it, and the Valley Arts ad was still in there. And I went, screw it. I'm gonna tell them whatever I gotta tell them. So I went in there, and they said, are you working anywhere now? I said, yeah, I've been working at this place down the street. And I said, but there's not that much repair work, and the guy won't turn the AC on, and I can't take it. They went, oh, that's pretty weird. And I said, and I ran a repair shop in Seattle, which was a little bit of a stretch. But I just said, I ran a repair shop by myself in Seattle. And Mike McGuire just went, all right, we'll give you a shot. And the first thing that they gave me to do to test me was an SVT. And it was great because the dealership that I worked at in Seattle was an Ampeg dealer. So I'd already become familiar with those. And I knew something about them, first of all. And second of all, the SVT that they wanted me to work on was owned by my next door neighbor in my apartment building, who was this great bass player that was, he was in a band called, and he later became the bass player in Fear.
Wow.
Lorenzo Buni. Fantastic bass, amazing musician. Along together, well, we kind of played in bands on and off, and he had taken it there to get it fixed. And they quoted him a pretty high price. And I said, hey, I'm going to be working at this place. I could probably save you a few bucks on your repair. And he's like, oh, great, man. So I already knew what was wrong with it. I already knew the owner of it. And I thought that it wasn't going to be a big deal. So I opened it up, and the other guy who I was replacing that was on his way out, which is why they hired me, is the other guy had given his notice. That was in between me and Paul. His name was Pete Geerlings, who went on to work at Western Digital, designing hard drives. Right? And he just said, you need to do the update on this SVT. I said, what update is that? And he says, well, it's in the engineering manual. I went, uh-oh. So I read the engineering manual, and I went, oh, this isn't so bad. It was changing the old kind of power tubes that they were using to 550s. And I read all the documentation. I went, oh, I think this will be not a problem. I really just have to do a neat job and follow instructions. So I carefully went through the thing and meticulously did this rebuild and fired it up, and it worked great, and the customer was happy. And Pete went and told the owner of the store that I dove into this really heady engineering manual and did this repair the first time, and it worked, and he was really impressed by that. So they hired me full time, and then Pete left, and I became the head of the department. And then that was the boys to men moment, where there's outstanding repairs of every kind of amp. There was Fenders, there was Mesas, there was Gallion Krugers, there was SVTs, there was modified Marshalls, and there was Carvins, and all kinds of stuff that I had never seen before. And Paul Rivera came in one day, and he walked up to the door and he says, "Hi, I'm Paul Rivera," held out his hand, and I need to buy a couple of transformers. Oh, is that something you do all the time? And he goes, "Oh, yeah." And I went, "Okay, so what do you need?" And he says, "Well, I need a power transformer for a deluxe." And I went, "I think we have one." And I went and I grabbed it. It was on the shelf, and all the wires were hanging out the top because it was upside down. And I grabbed it and went to the front counter and put it on the counter. And he said, "Thanks. And let me give you a little advice. Don't ever carry a power transformer by its leads again." Okay. I went, okay. So I just showed Paul what a rube I was. And so he had my number immediately. But he was very gracious, and he says, "Look, if you ever need any help, give me a call." And he ended up, he would call me every once in a while. "Hey, Jay Grayson is coming in, Jay Graydon, or somebody else is coming in. I'm referring them to you. They've got a repair. It's real simple. Here's all you got to do. Just do this and this and this and this. And if you run into any problems, give me a shout." And that happened a few times, and it just helped me build my confidence, knowing that somebody had my back that I could call. And I also developed a relationship with all the guys that were the technical liaisons at the companies, Mesa and Peavey and Marshall, and all the different companies. I made a point to get a hold of their engineering guys that knew the technical answers, and so I could call them. Done users, I would just call and say, "Hey, I got this," and they go, "Oh, I know what that is," and they would tell me. And so I used all those resources to pull myself up by the bootstraps. And then, and just because of the volume of the stuff and the speed that it needed to be turned, and the level of clientele that they had, I just really had to step my game up. They were open till 9 o'clock, and sometimes I would be there till 9 o'clock every night. And I knew what time it was when they would and they didn't know that I was upstairs because I was going through books, or I was working on a repair, or I was grinding on something that I didn't know how to do and had to learn. And I didn't have the internet. I only had the documentation that we had, addicts and books, and a few people that I could call. And so, the lights would go off, and I'd call down on the intercom, "Hey, I'm still up here, turn the lights on so I can see my way out." And that 4 years, and I went from a with a soldering iron to somebody that really had some chops. So that was what really got me started. And then Valley Arts started to change, and this new shop had opened up called Music Tech, and they needed somebody. And so I moved from Valley Arts to Music Tech, and I worked there for another 4 years and I had some ideas and some thoughts, and this, and actually Paul Rivera again kept calling me. When he was at Yamaha, he called me and wanted to hire me as an assistant. And when he went to Pig Nose, he called me and said, "Hey, I got an opening if you want it." And then when he went to Fender, the same thing. And I kept turning him down, and he goes, "Why do you keep turning me down?" And I said, "Well, I want to play music. I don't want to commit to a job like you're offering me, because I don't want to let you guys down." And he goes, "It's the same as working as Valley Arts." And he says, Besides, there's a million guys like you out there that all think they're going to be rock stars. He was kind of got a little condescending, and I went, well, hell, I'll show you. And I showed him that I wasn't going to be a rock star. And
like a lot of us,
I said, you know, the last thing I want to do, and then he asked me to join him. And I said, sorry, if the one opportunity that you've offered me, that's probably the most attractive one. I said, but I've got this band. We're out touring, and I got to do that, and I just don't think I can give you the time. And he goes, what's the band? And it was this punk rock band called the Dickies. And they were really popular at the time, and we were touring a lot and selling out a lot of shows and making great money. It was a hell of a lot of fun. And I was doing some session work, and I'd done a couple of movie soundtrack sessions for a couple of major films, and self getting all this work. And so I turned Paul down again, and then I just accidentally I hit a kind of a dry spell in music. Personality. These two people warring inside, the musician and the tech geek. And one time, every once in a while, one guy would win, and then another guy would win, and so the tech geek guy was starting to win because music was drying out, and I was getting frustrated. So that's where we circle back to the power amp story. I basically did that to make an amp for myself, because I went to Soldano because I'd heard about his amps, and I went to check it out because I wanted a particular thing, and I didn't want to have to build it myself. And so I went and checked out his amps, and I thought, you know, these are really nice, but it's not what I'm looking for. Damn you, Mike! I'm gonna have to go build it myself. I was mad. So I went and started building my own amp, and then some people heard it. You know, that just kind of pulled me into the tech thing. And honestly, when the power amp thing started to happen, I had made a deal with Andy's partner, which named Greg Bales, they had become partners, and they had morphed Andy Brauer's into a subsidiary music store called Making Music. And he offered me some seed money to build a batch of amps, a bunch of these power amps, and I told him how much it would cost me to build them and sell them to him, and he was okay with that price. And he wanted, I don't know, 5 or 10 or something like that.
A lot more than that in the end, wasn't it?
On an album. I'm sorry?
It was a lot more than that in the end, wasn't it? Power amps?
I didn't hear what you said.
It was a lot more than that.
Reflection is bouncing.
Oh, it was a lot more than that. Power amps, right? That Greg was buying.
Oh, I think, well, yeah, it was initially. I think it was initially 5 or 10. Let's see how it goes, and then after that, 50 or something. But
I remember
the
them
initial
at Andy
one
Brauer's.
Was just enough.
I remember them stacked up at Andy Brauer's, like in a huge pile, like a ton of them.
Yeah, stacked up. They were stacked up to the ceiling. But before that, I had just built these 5 or 10, and I thought, honestly, I was producing this record with all my own material, and my thought was, I'm going to build these amps. They're going to cost me this. I'm going to sell them for this. I'm going to have this much money. It's going to be enough money to get my album finished and mastered. Shop it. And that was going to be the end of my amp career. I was just going to do that batch and then marry away.
Mm-hmm.
And
didn't work out that way.
And here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, life takes you.
And now I have a drummer, and I got a couple of guys that I'm thinking about for bass, but I got a drummer now, so I'm still working on that.
That's all right. One day you'll make it. So tell us. So bring us to the VHT. So, and
Well, that was
Well,
the
that was
beginning of VHT.
Okay, with the power amp and everything, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. And then
So
when did you start Fryette branded amplification?
when there's a I'm hearing springs boinging around. Did you say?
Oh, really? When did you start?
Could you repeat the question?
When did you start Fryette amplification? When did that turn in? When did VHT turn into Fryette?
Wow, I think must be my connection must be bad or something. I think you asked me when was the transition from VHT to Fryette.
You got it.
Correct.
Okay, that was 2009, and there really wasn't much of a transition other than a name change. And for a number of years, I had been feeling constrained by the VHT name because it was so tightly wound up with metal. Nothing against metal, nothing against loud guitars. It just we were just so pigeonholed by that there was a lot of players that I wanted to reach and show them what these things were capable of, and they really wouldn't give it the time of day because of the look and the whole presentation was much more modern, and they didn't hew the vintage road very tightly. Me personally, I'm pretty much an old school kind of guitar amp. Um, 50 because of the success of it and all the bands that were using it. Was mega at the time. It was Lukather and it was Megadeth and it was Living Colour and it was Metallica, and everybody was just using them. So it just was assumed that we were this metal centric company. I suppose my long purple hair didn't help much, but it began to be, there wasn't any way that we could sort of unwind that message. And I had been doing some contract work for this Chinese company, design stuff and some consulting. They were trying to build tube amps and they weren't having much luck, and they hired me to help them design some stuff. And then they decided they made an offer to buy VHT, and I said no. And we went along and did some more work, and I advised them on some more stuff, and he kept coming back and offering to buy the company, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then I came up with the idea of, why don't you just pay us for the name, the badge, and we'll rebrand. So if we got together here at the company and all hobnobbed around, and we just figured how much take for us in marketing to remarket the company under my name. There would be kind of an effort, but at the time, with the way the internet was going, it was kind of was doing things, was destroying existing brand legacies and creating new ones. Kind of a thing that all these tech companies were doing. AT&T and all these legacy companies were getting new names like Verizon and so on. Everybody was going this route. It was sort of seen as a progressive move, and we thought, interesting. The reason I didn't put my name on the front of the amps in the first place is because I just thought it was a funny mouthful. So I called a bunch of people. I called Pat Quilter, who was a longtime friend of mine, and I called Bob Gallion, who was a longtime friend of mine, and I called some people in the industry. And you think of the name Fryette on the front of a rock and roll amp, and they all went, God, you're finally going to do it. It's about time. Geez, what took you so long? And that was like uniformly the response. And I was so taken aback by that, all right. So we worked out a deal with the company in China. They agreed to buy and the original deal was going to be that we were going to design some amps for them. And then they decided that they didn't need any help, that once they'd gotten a little bit of their pump primed from the work that I had done for them, and then they hired their own tech guy that said that he could design some stuff. And so they decided that they could go it alone, and it would save them a little money if they did that on their own, and we didn't do the consulting part. We just do the just do the sell the brand for this fixed amount of money, which was, I remember when reading about Leo Fender when he sold Fender, and what he said that he thought he was going to get $1 million for it, and then CBS paid him 16. He almost fell out of his chair. And it wasn't numbers like that, but I was really truly surprised at what they were willing to pay for just a name, and no goodwill, no brand legacy behind it. They were going to make their own stuff, and it came down to, not only were they not going to build anything that we had designed, but they were not going to be able to build anything that we designed and not attach any of their marketing to anything that we had already done, which is really quite a stretch, but they felt confident in doing that. And we went, great. And so we went ahead. And we went ahead and did that. And right at the time that all that got finalized and we did our first NAMM show as Fryette, a lot of people were excited about it, but the economy was sliding into the tank at the same time. So the combination of changing to Fryette, sales dropping like a stone, and the economy tanking, is that little that little cash pile that landed on us at that time ended up being our lifeline that helped carry us through that whole thing. So while the market was flattening out and people weren't buying big amps and big cabs anymore, and all of that was going on, we were just hunkering down and trying to figure out what we were going to do next. So that occurred in 2009, and then from between 2009 and 2011, it was actually funny how it worked out, because with the economy being so slow and sales being so slow, I had all of this free time. My mind really get wrapped around projects where before it was so busy that I just couldn't think about anything. What should we do next? What's it going to be? And we were in a rut, and it was hard to get out of the box and all of that. There's all these other little things that have to be tended to every day. And this time I was able to just not only try to get out of the box, but I mean, there was outside of the box was everywhere. There was all kinds of things going on that I could see a way to. What I've always done is try to find problems to solve, and try to find a unique way to solve that. That all came from when I was playing. I've had problems to solve of my own, and it became, I figured out how to do this thing. This is something that a lot of people would like to have solved, So my solutions became my potential customers' solutions, and that was a driving thing in a lot of the design ideas, and it's even more so now, because there's a whole new sort of field of all this stuff, recording interface and silent speakers and all these kinds of things. And there are all kinds of things that I experimented with, even when I was at Valley Arts. They were ideas exploring at the time, because everybody was recording like crazy. So I had this hidden little treasure trove of ideas way in the back of my mind that sort of rose to the surface. And so in a way, I was just sort of recycling ideas whose time had seemed to come back.
Kind of like the power
I just had a lot of
station.
time to develop it.
Like kind of like the power station and stuff like that?
Sorry, say that again.
Kind of like the power station?
Yeah, exactly. The power station was a distraction. It was very funny the way that came out. I started out doing the LX2, which is the single space power amp. And once I got the prototype of that up and running, I had this little sort of flat profile I could experiment with. And, you know, I've been watching the attenuator discussions, the voluminous number of attenuator discussions, heated discussions,
pages and
high
pages.
energy discussion. And, you know, all this conversations about transparency and tone and all of this kind of stuff. There was just tons and tons of it. There was all this. There was just a lot of territory being explored over this getting amplifiers at the optimum volume with the optimum tone. And I think at the time, that Phantom,
the Faustine
attenuator, the Faustine Phantom attenuator was the big topic of the day. And he had come to us and because we had been doing some contract work for other companies at the time anyway, and he heard about that, and he contacted me and said, "Can you build these? We've been trying to find somebody that can build these in production, and we're not having such good luck." And I went, "Yeah, we could do that." So he brought it over, and we looked at it, and we sort of analyzed how he was producing them and figured out how we could make them a little bit more efficiently. And you know, gave him a bid that he seemed to like, and then I didn't hear from him again. And in the meantime, there were more and more people jumping into it, and to me, it was like more of the same old, more of the same old, more of the same old. And I was then by then very familiar with the Phantom, and I was also very familiar with the hot plate.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been using them all along for a long time. The reason I was using the hot plate is because in probably 1970, I built a little homebrew attenuator that I could not find anywhere. And so I bought one from Andy because I had lost mine. And but the more the subject kept coming up, the more I started digging through all my junk, and I didn't find that attenuator, but I found the documentation for it when I was cleaning up some files. I found this folder and I opened it up, and there was this schematic of this attenuator, and I thought, wow, I was using that. That's terrible. You know, I mean, I thought at that time, I could just look at it on paper and see that it was going to be
awful,
a nothing burger, you know, but I thought, well, now I know what not to do. And then, so that's when I started experimenting with reactive lows, because I knew that was the deal. I'd spent a lot of time working on speakers. I'd worked with eminence on designing speakers, and I'm really into speakers, and I spent a lot of time examining speakers and tearing them apart and specifying things for our different amps. And so I knew a lot about reactive lows and how they behaved, and I was experimenting with that. And so I was playing around with some reactive lows, and I had this LX2 prototype, and I just looked at it, and in my mind, those two ideas just went kishik, and I went, okay, so that solves the problem. I'm basically a lazy person. I work I like to keep really busy, and the only reason that I stay busy is by giving myself so many things that I have to do that they just have to be done. Because if I don't do that, I'll just be lazy and I won't get anything done. Keep my list of responsibilities hard and heavy because I just work best under pressure. And the idea of spending a lot of time mathematically working out all those switch positions to get really the right amount of attenuation from each step of the switch, and all the resistors and all the wiring. And I remember looking at inside the Phantom and thinking, man, what a wiring nightmare. I mean, that's one of the big problems with those things, is just what a nightmare they are to assemble. And you know, what'd be really easy is if it's just the load just does the work of the load, and we power the speaker another way. And this nice little low profile power amp design in the LX2, half of it would be perfect. We just plug that into that, and then the power amp would drive the speaker. And my theory was that the power amp would restore the relationship between the speaker and the player. Power amp having this breathing, sort of life-giving sort of interactivity on top of the reactive load behavior that was being created by the load. And when I heard it, I just knew it was right. And I called everybody into the demo room, and I showed it to them. And one of the girls that was working here, who's got a great ear, she really knows good sound, and she knows when something is right. And she just asked me to explain what it was, and I explained it, and then I showed it to her how it worked, and then she just started crying. She said, "This is going to be a hit product. I know it. I just know it." And there's tears coming out of her eyes, and I'm like, "Wow, really?"
Well, you know.
Then we worked it into a package, you know, and it to people, and it was like everybody was just like going, "Oh my God," you know. And
it's been successful.
I don't know. To me, I just, you know, it's like, okay, this is what it feels like when you've written a hit single. Everybody just knows, and that's what happened. I showed it to a couple of people. I showed it to Dave. And I showed it to David Torn, and this is how I knew that we really had something. Both David Torn and David Friedman started texting me expletives, like in a row. F you, I hate your guts, you're a punk ass. And I was like cracking up. I mean, that's Friedman's way of saying I love you, you know, and that just like really hit home. And it was the same with Torn. I've had this long relationship with Torn, and the same thing, you little punk. And
what were you gonna ask, Dave?
Well,
I was just like,
let me add a little background to that. You know, years ago, really early on, I have a Plexi 50-watt Marshall. Well, let me go back a little further. Let me go back a little further. The back in the day when I was doing racks and stuff all the time, early on in the early 90s, basically, it was really commonplace to slave amplifiers. It was pretty common. It was done all the time. So, you know, you had a load. There were various choices for how you were doing that load, anywhere from a load resistor to a speaker to Palmers to all sorts of different things. But there was these loads and these power amps like the VHT or various other ones, H&H or different things, and people would slave old Marshalls and stuff through this rack of effects.
right.
And that was really commonplace. Over the years, it kind of fell out of being common. People kind of forgot about it, sort of, so to speak. You know, more modern things came along, preamps and stuff, and it kind of replaced the slaving of amplifiers and things like that. But
that's right.
I always did that. So, and the funny thing is I have a long story. I have this 50-watt Plexi Marshall, right? And the whole story behind it was I got it for $300. Wow. When I got it, I don't even know what was in it. But this was really early on, before I was into amps and before I had learned what I've learned now. And I asked Reinhold Bogner to modify it because he had modified a 20-watt Marshall that I really loved. It sounded really killer. But he did the same thing on the 50-watt. It sounded nothing like the 20-watt. You know, whole different architecture. I understand why. And I'm like, oh, I don't like this. So Stevie put it back to stock for me. And that amp still exists in that same form today. And that has been the one amp that I've kept all these years.
Wow. And that's the amp that you use as
That's kind of like my home base of what I always kind of come back to. My reference point of what is a really cool Marshall-y sort of tone, it's a very aggressive amp, that particular one. But I always did this slaving in various loads and tried everything for years, all the power amps and all this stuff. So fast forward a million years later, he comes out with this in this little box, and I'm just like, fuck you, Jesus. I mean, it was great. I'm like going, this is fucking great, and that's basically, the backstory to it all,
Yeah, that's
so
amazing.
now you have this, and you can put your pedal board in the loop of it, or you can run your old Marshall or your high watt or whatever you have blasting into it. And
Dave, you were also developing one, right? And you decided not to.
An attenuator? Yeah, no. Yeah, we had developed attenuator. And yeah, no. Why? It was going to be like an $800 or $900 attenuator, and you come along and make that. So can't top that. I mean, it's cool because you're going to put your effects in the loop, and you could use it as a power amp. You can use it as a load. It's endless what you can use it for.
Yeah,
really.
Actually, yeah, I've apologized for that many times.
Oh, that's fine. It's fine. It was going to be too costly to make anyway, so it's the same problem that you said with the Faustine. It's labor intensive. The parts cost a lot. There's lots of resistors, and they cost money, and the reactive part of it, and everything else.
So we actually have a question.
There's just no margin.
Tom Platts has a question for you, Steve. What's the difference between version 1 and version 2 Power Station?
Just the balanced line out and the level switch on the front, and there's a low pass filter on the line out that's switchable on the version 2.
Okay.
The level switch, the volume control circuit for the power amp that drives the power amp has a wide range of gain, and in order to be sufficient range to attenuate a fully blown 100-watt non-master volume amp and boost something as small as a 1-watt, mini amp up to gigging level, we needed a lot of range in the volume control. So with the smallest of the mini amps being boosted, that meant that the volume control would be set really, really high, like 3 o'clock to, all the way up. And if you were a Plexi, a stock Plexi, 0 to 9 o'clock was about all the range that you had. So that just made it, when you were using a cranked amp like that, that just made it a sort of a picky proposition on the volume control. So we just added a range switch so that with a cranked high power amp, you had more volume control range. And then if you need the extra gain to boost even, anywhere up to from 1 to 15 watt amp to, 26-inch kick and SVT rhythm section level, you would switch the switch, and then you would have enough gain to be able to do that. So that was just like a little additional problem solving modification. The XLR in so many situations, you don't really need a balanced line. The purpose of a balanced line is so that when you're running very long lengths of signal, of low-level signal, you need it to be very low impedance, and you need it to be hum canceling, because a long length of 100 feet or 200 feet of cable will pick up hum from electrical stuff under the floor and the walls or whatever it happens to be laying on top of. And the key feature of XLR, the balanced line, is to cancel the hum, the magnetic field hum that those cables pick up over long lengths. A lot of people think that melody unless it's balanced line, but that's not really the case. It's really just a feature for bucking hum that's picked up by cables over long lengths.
Oh, interesting.
And so I built it without the XLR out, on the assumption that it's such a low impedance when you take the line out off of the thing, and most of the time it isn't going to be going very far, but there was just a pretty ongoing
request,
belief, however misplaced it is, there's just this sort of strong belief that it isn't pro if it isn't XLR. So I just went, all right, well, it's probably easier to add that feature than it is to explain that all the time in emails. So
I really
the same with
this.
the low pass filter. The low pass filter, well, Dave has a little different take on the low pass filter than I do. The low pass filter to me was just taking out the extreme high frequency junk of a cranked amp that nobody wants to listen to, and it's a very subtle high frequency roll off. It isn't even noticeable till you're out past 5K. But some people want to have all of that in there when they're going into IRs, because they feel that the IR operates differently with that filter in than without it. So again, it was engage in the debate evermore, or add the switch and end it.
There you go.
So that's what that was for.
And isn't on the new?
So the biggest difference was the level switch. That was the most functional update.
And on the new one too, isn't there a way that you can use it for a load better than the older ones? You don't need to have power.
Yeah, well,
applied.
oh yeah, that was just made less confusing.
Yeah.
The old ones can be used very simply as a silent load. There isn't anything special that you have to do. You just don't plug in the speaker. On that one, you had to plug in a plug in the output jack and just leave the volume down to use it as a silent load.
Right.
But a lot of people felt like, oh, well, it's a tube amp. Don't you have to have a speaker load? And again, that was either needing a better solution or a better explanation. That was a case where the better solution was really being demanded and was necessary. So I just reworked. It's got a safety feature on the output that when you don't have a speaker plugged in, the power amp section automatically goes on standby. And the version 2 version, now when you unplug the speaker jack, not only does the amp go on standby, but the load is internally routed back to the internal load. The external amp that you have plugged into it routes automatically back into the internal load. So, and it doesn't require the amp to be on in order to do that. So now it will work as a silent load, and you can get signal out of the unbalanced and balanced line out without having the power on, for people that want to record late at night and don't want to have any extraneous, power being turned on for any reason. The fan, even though it's a very, very quiet fan, some people don't want to hear any fan. So it's just better that you could just turn it off and still use it as a silent load. The reactive functions, the voicing switches still operate. And yeah, so that was a biggie.
It's ingenious. I got to get one. You sold.
Mark, Yeah, down the road, your room's going to be filling up.
I know. I know. My wallet will be empty.
Your wallet will be empty. Your room will be filling up, and
yeah, but I'll
you'll
have
need
all
a
this
bigger
great.
room.
I'll have this great gear. Yeah. Well, that's the next thing. That's what my wife says. We got to get a bigger house.
So, yeah, well, that's what it's all about. You know, the most rewarding thing about that, and the thing that people tell me all the time, they email us all the time. I'll see people at shows all the time say this. I went back and I'm reacquainting myself and re-exploring all my gear that I haven't played with for a really long time and rediscovering how wonderful it is. And it's just wonderful to have people say, you've given all this stuff that I forgot about a whole new level of life and utility. And to me, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I know how many times I've had things stacked up in the warehouse and we've sold. Don't use it. It's just a waste. Somebody out there should be playing it. You know, it's just a shame to have that stuff sitting around. Yeah.
Right. It was too loud. It was, yeah, that's great. So, tell us about Sound City amps.
So Sound City is a personal mission for me. It's a labor of love, and
Wait.
lineage.
Is that to make people deaf?
Well,
it's got the power station.
You know, there's a thing. There's a whole long conversation about sound pressure level and inspiration that we can have, and we'll probably end up having it. I hope we have the stamina to get into it tonight, because I've been thinking a lot about it. But no,
I'm just kidding. No.
It comes from I actually have a history with Sound City that's also intertwined with the history of high watt. And I started out playing high watts. I borrowed a friend's Marshall, and everybody had Marshalls when I first started switching from drums to guitar. And I had seen high watts in the stores in Seattle. Where I was acquainted with high watts is I had seen the first Jethro Tull tour, which was small theaters, like the size of the Fillmore or smaller in Seattle. Seattle's version of the Fillmore was the Eagles Auditorium, and 1,500 people, I think, maybe less, that it held, and funky old building with wood floors and a big tall wooden stage, and everybody played there. And when Jethro Tull came out, we went and saw me and my friends went and saw their first tour, and they were wonderful. But besides how wonderful they were using these high watt amps that we'd never heard of. And that was pretty early enough that a foregone conclusion that that's what the Who used, because at the time, so that would have been 68. So the Who were still using 67, 68. And we were just like, those are just so cool looking. There's a stealth about them, you know. Marshall had the gold and the trim, you know, and all that. And the high watt had this black. It just had a vibe. It stared you down. You know, it was cool when you saw it in the store. And I was just really drawn to that. And so I played it in the store, and it was too expensive, and I couldn't afford it. And I was selling a drum kit. I had a couple of drum kits, and I was selling one of them. And a guy called me up, and he said, "Are you interested in a trade?" I said, "Well, not really. I'm just saving up money to buy an amp." And he says, "Well, I've got this. Let me tell you what I got. It's a high watt 50." And I went,
"Hello."
That's what I was going to buy. And he says, "Well, will you take this and $50?" And I went, "Bring it." And he brought it over, and something special about it being in my house, you know, being in my room, as opposed to being in the store. In the store, it was inaccessible. In my room, I had a Marshall straight 412 cab, but in my gear room, with this guy who was like ready to take he loved my drum kit and was ready to take it. It was all of a sudden accessible, and I was like, and I played through it, and it just sounded wonderful to me. It was just like, it just spoke to me. I don't know what it was. I was just a totally green, been playing guitar 6 months. I had no idea what it was doing to me or for me. It was just, everything was right about it. And that's all I knew and cared about.
Mm-hmm.
So off went my drums, and then I started playing this thing and started figuring out. One really cool thing that he told me is after half an hour, it starts getting really sweet. He was almost apologizing for it. I was digging how it sounded as soon as I plugged in, but he's like, wait till it warms up. And I'm, well, it already sounds great now. Does it sound funky? He says, oh no, you'll see. And I played it after he left. I played it for an hour, and then I didn't really think anything of it. But then when the next time I played it, after, the next day when it was cold again, and I went, huh, oh, I think I see what he's talking about now. And I played it some more. And then the thing is after a half an hour of playing it loud enough to get it to warm up, your ears are getting beat to shit.
Yeah.
So how would you know?
It's getting sweet.
And that kind of eluded me it eluded me for a couple of days until it struck me that what was going on. So I turned it on and turned the standby switch on. So it was running. And then I went away and did something for a couple hours. And I came back and played it with fresh ears. And I went, I see. And then I got a gig with some band. We started playing. And then that's when I really came face to face with the behavior of it. At the beginning of the set, the sound guy was going, can you back it off a little bit? And then at the end of the set, it only had so much gas, and we had a pretty powerful bass player and drummer, and I think there was a B3 in the band, so it was pretty full. So after the second set or something like that, maxing it out, if I turned the volume up anymore, it just got mushy. So there was a limit to how much volume I would get out of it, and that's where it sat. But when it got to that point, Les Paul Gold Top, I was in heaven. It was great, and I was like, okay, this is my rig. And then I got in a year later, I got into a band with another guy that had a 50 Watt Marshall, and we played in his club 6 nights a week, and I had my head and cabinet sitting on the floor, and he had his up on a milk crate, so it's closer to the mic, and he kind of cut through a little bit better. And so I started putting mine up on a milk crate because he was, sort of filling up the room, and my sound was fuller and more powerful, but he was cutting through more because his was up. So I put mine up, and then I could hear it a little better too. And I was like, okay with that for a while. And then he didn't like that. So he started getting some pedals and doing things to, turning his treble up and stuff. And it didn't sound as good, but his thing was like, well, I need to be the louder guitar player in the band. And I sort of went,
That's the problem. That's the problem when you have two guitar players in a band.
Yeah.
Only one guitar player in a band.
And I happened to be in a music store in Seattle, and they had a used 100 Watt iWatt.
I'll show him.
Yeah, man. If 2 tubes are good, then 4 tubes are twice as good, and so I put it on layaway. I gave him like $50 or $100. We made a deal. Trade the 50 for the 100 plus, I think it was $250 or $200 or something, and I put that on layaway for 4 weeks, $50 a week, and on the proviso that when I brought the 50 back, it had to be in the same condition it was when I showed it to the guy to do the deal. So I had to babysit that thing. I took it to gigs. I covered it up at night, and I wiped it off, and I just kept it in really clean shape. So when I had my last $50, I went down to get my 100, and like I was, oh man, like driving back home from that music store with that thing in the back seat, I can tell you, my hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I was just like, man, did it grab a hold of me? I was like, I really literally could not wait to get home and fire it up. And then get it to the gig. And a couple nights later, I took it to the gig, and what a rude awakening! It's just like that thing was so uncontrollably loud. It was just, I solved that. I solved the volume war.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't like I just fixed the volume, as I just erased the guy and everybody else in the band. And I just went, for a minute, it was like, this is awesome. And after a while, there was just something about the 50 that wasn't in there. And I struggled with that a long time. And that eventually, led me to tweaking and finding out what that was all about. But that's another long, voluminous bunch of blather that I won't get into. But the takeaway was that there was something about that 50. And it started me on a quest to find out what that was about. And I went back to that same music store, and they had a Sound City. See, I'm tying the story together. They had a Sound City head in there. And I told the guy what I was experiencing. He says, well, we got these Sound Cities in. They just came in. You had to check one of these out. And I plugged it in, and I started playing through it. And I went, oh, this sounds kind of interesting. And then it went, and some smoke started coming out of it. And I went, yeah, I'm not so interested in that anymore. So
it's a tube problem.
That was, yeah. So that was around 72-ish. So that was around after Sound Cities had been around a while. They're starting to become distributed in the US, and that's the 6-tube version. It had the multicolored knobs on it.
Oh boy.
And I just wasn't impressed with the way it looked. It just didn't have that look that the Hi-Watt had, that I'm going to own you look. And I've always had this thing of, if gear has to look a certain way, has to have a certain attitude in the way it looks, and it has to smell a certain way, especially the speakers. They have to smell a certain way to me. And when they have those, it's like, oh man, I'm all in the experience. I'm all wrapped up in it. So those things really mean a lot to me. And that was the one smell that I don't get so wrapped up in, is the smell of burnt resistors. That's not as enticing as the smell of curing vinyl, or a smell of a speaker that was made across the ocean from the speakers that we have in our Fender amps here. Just had it was made by these other people, foreign people, in another place, in another way, and it was a lot of strong attraction to that. But the Sound City, I kind of felt sorry for it, because it just didn't quite have it. And really, that's probably as much as I thought about it for the longest time. But that 50-watt Hi-Watt always had a place in my heart. And its DNA is wrapped up in the DNA of all the stuff that I've made ever since, although it's a different character. But there's a certain thing about that. And not only that, but I really had there was a takeaway from opening that up. And the takeaway was how it was built, and the attention to detail. And then, having worked at Valley Arts, I had some interactions with the Hi-Watt company, and just like for a fleeting second with David Reeves. And there wasn't going to be a relationship there, really. There could have maybe been. There was attempts to get more and more Hi-Watt, get it more solidly founded in the U.S. and better distribution and marketing and brand visibility and all that, but it wasn't happening yet. But I wanted to be in on the ground floor of that. So when I was working at Valley Arts, I met the Hi-Watt people at the NAMM show, and I told them a little, very condensed little version of the story I'm telling you now, and they were really impressed by that. And so there was a person that I had contact with, and they sent me some parts, and they assigned Valley Arts to be the official Hi-Watt service station in Southern California. And it was all real exciting. And then David Reeves passed away. I had just written him a letter to tell him a little something about me, and then I heard that he had passed away, and so that to me was kind of like the end of an era. But it's something about the way that he had built his amplifiers and his approach and the way they looked just told me I felt like I knew something about this person, whatever little it might have been. I felt an affinity for that.
You had a connection to it.
Yeah. Just I like the fact that it was it was neat, and there was just, even the outside had an attitude, but the inside had an attitude too. It didn't need to be that, but it was going to be that way, and that's the end of it. I think it might have been Paul Rivera or somebody else that told me a story about being David Reeves at an AM show and couldn't have been Rivera because he wouldn't have told him this, but telling him about, hey, it would be really great if I think it was a guitar player that I knew that had a conversation with him saying, hey, if you make an amp that's got like more overdrive, it'll be more popular with the LA players. And apparently Mr. Reeves just stood there and listened intently while the guy was yammering on. And at the end of it, he quietly said, then it wouldn't be a high watt, would it? And turned around and walked away. And I thought, wow, and now I think my inner voice says things like that, but I filter it out, and it comes out. I really appreciate the feedback and your interest. Thank you. And I try to understand where the person is coming from, and at least give them the courtesy of a listen. But a lot of times I can understand. Dave, you probably understand when people just come, they just got this brilliant one thing that you should do to your amp and it'll be perfect for me. And I understand that. I went through all that. And
sure.
And there's just certain, and there are things that you will do and can do and want to do, and there's things that you won't do and can't do and don't want to do. And that's what makes you, and that's what makes all these different amps, special in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
So that stuck with me. And then my partner Neil is an IP oriented guy, and we're always talking about what we can do, and we share thoughts about marketing and product ideas. And he has this great love of vintage, certain kinds of vintage gear, especially vintage British gear, which I share. And he was really into King Crimson, and I'm really into King Crimson, and on and on and on, and the Who and all this stuff. And so we were talking about oddball amps, and he called me up one day and he says, what do you think about Sound City? And I said, I said, I don't know. I know a bit about it. I know that David Reeves had something to do with the original ones that were made, and that he later split off and put all of his energy into high watt, and that there are some similarities between Sound City and high watt. And I said, but honestly, that's something that I probably knew a whole lot about 20-30 years ago and hadn't really thought about that much. But it doesn't take long to refresh and dig in and think about it. So I gave it some thought and I looked into it, and I realized that, this is something that is speaking to me, and not necessarily because of the Sound City brand, but because there is, in the original inception of it, there is David Reeves DNA in there, and there is a quality about them over a long period of time, from just before VHT started to about 2000, early 2000s, I've been approached by so many different owners or supposed owners of the High Watt brand about consulting with them or designing something for them or having a meeting about a possible collaboration and all that, and it never happened. And it seemed to me that it never happened because they didn't really know what they had and how to execute on it. It just felt like, we'll make an original exact copy of a DR104 and then or DR103 and we'll just make a really vintage correct one as a flagship, and then we'll make a metal amp for kids that we can sell. And I hated that, and I felt David Reeves would have hated that, and I wasn't going to go down that road. And so this was pitched to me on a number of occasions, and every time it came down to, I don't think that that's the way to do it. I think that you have to pay homage to the master, the pioneer of this thing, and develop a forward-thinking model, from the roots of that, organically. Bring it forward organically, and it's going to take some time to do correctly. It's not going to be you do this and then boom, you do that.
Right.
And that was my pitch every time. That's going to take some time, and I'll put the time into it. It's not going to be cheap for you guys, but it's not going to be easy for me either, because we have our thing to do. So in order for it to give it its real, what I considered its real due, that's what the deal needed to be, and they were never into it. So they understood it, they appreciated it, but they weren't signing on to it. And I thought, well, that's fine, just as well, because if I sold it a little short and went in sort of like halfway, and it didn't go well, it's my name on it.
Mm-hmm.
If it turns to shit,
Right.
And there was just no good outcome from taking that kind of a risk. It had to be done the right way.
So that led you from there
or no way
to develop the Sound City.
Well, when we acquired the Sound City brand, it was the opportunity to prove to myself and prove to everybody else that my thinking process is correct, and the way to really the delay, I'm losing. I don't have the audio anymore. Are you still there?
Yeah, we're still here.
We're still here.
Oh, okay. What was the last thing you said?
Well, I was talking the impetus for Sound
Mark?
City, and once you got the brand name, then from there it was kind of like, okay, now develop your own brand from that, right?
Yeah, and from my history of the mega man hours of tinkering in high watts and knowing them inside and out intimately, and knowing that Reeves developed Sound City. I think he actually, Sound City was a little bit of a diversion. He was already, the high watt brainstorm was already in process, but it wasn't officially launched. So Sound City slightly predates official high watt.
Mm.
And the Sound City 100 that he made at the time, that was the amp that Hendrix used when he first went to England, and T-Rex was using, and Page was tinkering with in the form of the Arbiter version of it, which was the same amp, said Arbiter instead of Sound City on it, and the Who and all of that, on the basis of that platform, I saw a way to do two things: develop the high watt from his original point of departure and move cohesively forward on that path,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to what happened in history, which is it went to a certain point and then it took a big left turn, and other engineering guys got involved and took it a different direction, and probably seemed like a valid direction at the time, but eventually they engineered themselves out of business, making models and feature sets and things like that that became sort of anachronistic. They didn't really match what the market really wanted anymore, and they kind of over-engineered them. People always talk about the Sound Cities that were poorly engineered. They weren't really poorly engineered. They were interestingly engineered. They were poorly executed, and not even poor quality parts. They were every bit as good a quality parts as Hiwatt was using. It's just that the execution was sloppy, and it was done that way because they were trying to save money and make them more affordable, which is they were trying to reach more musicians and get them in the hands of more people and make them more affordable. They eschewed all the extra time and effort making them, such works of wire art inside. But the technical direction that they took made them more of a one-trick pony, and the technical direction that David Reeves took with Hiwatt made it a much more specific sort of animal that you would encounter. There's a player for Hiwatt. It's a very specific kind of a player, and it isn't a Marshall player typically per se, especially a high gain Marshall player. That's not the player for Hiwatt. The Hiwatt guy is a precise player. They're not afraid to put what they're doing out there in front of people and have it heard, warts and all. It's loud and proud. There's a certain attitude that you have to have to stand in front of one of those things and go for it. And
it's very revealing.
It's not revealing. It's not for the faint of heart. And there was a character in the original 100 model that had a more organic sort of transition into distortion than the later evolution that was the form of Hiwatt, all the different variations of Hiwatts, which are all sort of based on a slightly evolved platform, which was cleaner, more headroom, almost more like Fender in a way, where it stayed clean, and then it hit breakup in kind of a hard way. So that's where it gets to, you turn it all the way up where you just play it clean as a pedal platform. There isn't a lot of in-betweeny there. And even attenuators don't really help it that much. And that was the problem I always had with it. There's this in-between area that I needed to get to, and those amps wouldn't do it as engineered. And I found an opportunity to be able to bridge that gap with the Sound City, but keep the platform mostly true to its original form. And in that way, I can sort of pay homage to David Reeves for what really is a legacy design that has staying power, that has its own personality. It's unique in the marketplace, and it's immediately recognizable when you hear it, in a different way than the Hiwatt is immediately recognizable, in a different way than a Plexi is immediately recognizable, in a different way than Fryette and Friedman and all these others are recognizable. They're takes on a theme, but they have their own sort of character. And the Sound City thing has its own vibe, and I just figured that I could take that and evolve it just a little bit to make it speak to more players, more contemporary players that are more old school kind of guys. But there's a voice in there that I think that the people are looking for. That's there, and that's the long way of saying that's what the connection between David Reeves and the Sound City and my attraction to the whole project, in a nutshell, is that it's something legitimate to build on, and in getting it out there and having people really respond positively to it. To me, it just I can honestly say that this is an aspect of the David Reeves history and his contribution, to this pantheon of great guitar amplifiers that I think that he's sort of like doesn't get his full measure of. And I decided I'm going to make it my sort of mission to make up for a little of that.
Well, and I think there's a lot of excitement.
Sort of, yeah, there is. People play it and their mouths hang open and they smile and they go, "Wow, I love this," and they like the look immediately. And I didn't really do much on the look. We just cleaned it up a little bit, just made it a little bit more consistent. But I just want people to know that there's a thing about the David Reeve design foundation, and it isn't about all the wires being solid core and perfect right angles inside the amp and all this pristine. That's not what it's about. It's about what he was setting out to achieve sonically, and he went this one particular direction, and he left a little gold mine for me to sort of extract a measure of performance out of that can go back and say this is the guy that he was the foundation of this direction, and deserves just as much credit for his contribution to that as Jim Marshall and Leo Fender.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. Hey, would you mind if I jump in the chat and say hi to a bunch of people who are there?
Absolutely.
Okay, great, because
Sure.
we've got a ton of people, and as I do that, I'll just throw out any questions that may pop up.
Sure.
But I'll just throw out some names. We have Steve Karen, Sinner, Scott MacArthur, Tom Brino, Tom Platts, Pete Schaefer, John Constantine, Michael Bishop. Let me see, the Guitar Guru Network, Keith Bears, and
hey Keith, how you doing, man?
Hey,
yeah, Keith is a good dude, and also Andy. So Keith and Andy at the Guitar Guru Network, good guys. Timothy Pierce. I always wonder if that's the same Tim Pierce it can't be though. The one with Pete Thorne.
If he would, he'd say hi, I would think.
Yeah. He says, hello, Dave, Mark, Steven, and everyone, but I think it's a different Tim Pierce. Let's see. We have Marvel Harris, John Constantine. I said Adam Scheinberg.
Craig Rundle.
Craig Rundles, yeah. Cat Dumpling. Yep. Craig Rundles was just with Grover this past week.
Yeah, I know about that. Yeah, I talked to Grover about that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, he was working on the Bones guitar. So anybody in the market for a Bones George Lynch guitar, check him out. Cat Dumpling, thanks for coming in, man. Appreciate that. And Johnny Bean gave us a recommendation on his show, so that was nice of him to send people over. Let's see, we've got, my eyes are going. I have to get new glasses. I got to get closer to the screen here. MJ4.
Make the fonts bigger.
I know. How do I do that? I have to do that. I'll figure that out later. Mark Berlou, I don't know how to pronounce that. Great show. I've watched all so far from Metro Forum. What's up, Dave? He says.
Hello.
Sodet 1972. We've got Guitar Lover. He says they're killer metal amps. He was talking about VHT.
Same thing you were talking about.
Yeah, thank you.
Cat Dumpling says Page had used VHT and now Fryette pretty much his entire career. I didn't know that. Is that true?
Yeah, Page Hamilton.
We hooked up with Page in, I think, 1995 or 6. When did let's see, Meantime, I think it was when Meantime came out.
Oh, okay.
I remember their manager called. We had a guy that working in our production department that was a big Helmet fan.
Mm-hmm.
and he played that record to death at pretty good volume in the production shop, pretty much all day long. and at first, to me, it was like this whole record sounded like it was just one key of just this rhythmic jam from beginning to end. I didn't really get any of the nuance of it because I'm running around doing my thing, but it was just like a constant presence. But it started really growing on me. And then I borrowed the CD from him and took it home and really listened to it. And then I started really getting it. And I went, oh. And yeah, a lot of it was in one key. A lot of the songs were in the same key. But it didn't matter anymore because I sort of got what the band was about. And I started really getting into it. And about that time, his manager called and said, I'm with I'm with Helmet, and we're getting ready to go do a new album, and he wants to hear your power amps. And those were the days when my filter didn't work as well as it does now, and I just blurted out, "Awesome! What key is the album going to be?" And I just went, oh, "You are such a dope," and he cracked up, and he said, "I'll tell Paige you said that," and I said, "Please do. Tell him I said it with love." And he went, "Okay." So. So we took some 2150 power amps over there, and I met him, and he was really gracious. And I said, "Sorry, that just slipped out." And he goes, "No, that was awesome." And we hit it off right off the bat.
Oh, that's funny.
And he was using Mesa gear, and he had a Harry Colby preamp. And his difficulty is that it didn't sound the same every night. He was having difficulty with consistency from night to night when they were touring, and the Colby thing was just, the only person that could work on it was Colby, and so whenever he had issues with it, he had to ship it to Colby, and he was just in a spot. And when they started recording the record, we took 2150s over there, and he called me the next day, and he's just like, "We're recording." They had just started doing guitar tracks. He says, "We're scrapping the guitar tracks, and we're doing them over again." I was really blown away, and so we've been pretty much brothers ever since. And yeah, so he's the Ultra Lead. At the time, that was right about the time the Ultra Lead was coming out, and at that time we were selling one Ultra Lead for 10 of the classics, which became CLXs later. It's pretty much 10-1. And
wow.
The minute Helmet started playing out live, that switched overnight. I was trying to tell people about what it is about the power amp, that it's cleaner and has more headroom, and it sort of gives the overdrive more articulation and detail, but that doesn't mean that it is only like a high headroom amp. It's got this quality if you turn the gain down. I used to explain it to people, but I wasn't very good at explaining it, I guess. But when he started playing live, I didn't need to explain it anymore. It just started selling like crazy, and it became our top selling amp. So Paige is personally responsible for making the Ultra Lead what it is today, and we just consider it his personal amp. I think he does too.
Wow, that's cool. That's a great story.
Yeah.
We've got Keith or Andy from the Guitar Guru Network. They said Evan at Fryette showed us around at the booth at NAMM. The power station and the valvulator were the highlights. Amazing units. That's good stuff.
Yeah, Evan is a tall, handsome, corn-fed, smiling ball of energy. We love him to death. He's been on the team for like 2 years now, and he's got a lot of passion, and he just talks to people and shows them what's what. And he doesn't hype anything. He just his enthusiasm and his excitement and his passion just spills out and infects people, and it's wonderful to watch that guy. He's just great to hang with. He's great to part of the family and the team, and he's just a lot of fun.
And he's in the chat too. He said, "That's me, Evan Delaney."
That's me,
Evan Delaney. So that's cool. Nice to see you in the chat, Evan. We have one comment from Jay. He said, "Just wanted to say hi and thank you for these awesome shows. I have a Friedman BE100 and a Fryette 252 power amp, and they are both awesome."
Right on, man.
Very cool.
Great.
Guitar Lover wants to know, can we talk about the switch from P50E to Fane?
Sure.
I have to say I don't know what that is.
The speakers.
Okay.
Okay.
The P50 is the speaker that we had produced by Eminence for our speaker cabinets, and that transpired in about 1995. So that was my second experience working with Eminence speaker, and they're wonderful, wonderful people. They're great to work with. They were so accommodating and are still to this day. And when I first started working with them, they spent a lot of time with this little company that they'd never heard of, that they 10, 12 samples of a 12-inch speaker for a combo that we were making without even knowing if we were going to buy 10 or 50 or 100. They never even asked. They just dove in and were very enthusiastic, and they were great. So when we decided we wanted to try a low power, this was for a speaker for combos that needed to be able to handle some power, because the combos were 100 watts and open back. And I decided I wanted to try a guitar speaker with them that would be specifically designed for 212 and 412 cabs in a closed back configuration. And I wanted to use a sealed back cab so that it would be punchy on the bottom end and detailed to go with, with the ultra lead and with the 2150 sound, that immediate. And so they worked on that, and I gave them a lot of engineering details and feedback, and they just took it all in and they delivered a speaker, and it was great. And we started using it, and we got a bit of pushback because people didn't recognize that an Eminence could be something other than a Fender speaker. They weren't really doing the marketing that they are doing today with their Patriot series and all all their their retail series speakers. They weren't doing that. They were just strictly an OEM. They were strictly manufacturing speakers for other manufacturers, and they weren't really going out there and touting their own name. And that was a little difficult because we were trying to get people to, I've talked to them a lot about that. You guys got to raise your profile, raise your brand image in this market, because people don't really know that you can do this stuff. And they eventually started doing that. And before that, it was, why are you using those cheap Eminence speakers in your cabinets? Why aren't you using Celestians? And there was a quality that I wanted out of the speakers, and they were willing to give it to me, and they worked with me to give it to me, and their quality was great, and their consistency was great, and the relationship was great. And how can you argue with that? It was just easy. When people go out of their way to make things easy for you, you don't fight that, right?
And it's quality stuff.
And it's quality stuff. And so we kind of struggled and worked on our dealers and our distributors to take it on faith, and eventually they did, and we won them over. And then Eminence started producing their commercial speakers and raising their profile, and now the P50 is really a well-known speaker that people really like and respect. And I think a lot of people understand that it sounds good in other cabinets, but it sounds the way it was intended to in ours. And so it's a marriage of sorts. And that's how much I thought about it. As it turns out, when I first became acquainted with high watts, I also first became acquainted with Fane speakers and fell in love with those for the same reason. They had a certain balanced quality to them. And I grew to really love that sound. And it went away when Fane was sold to another company in the 70s, and never made that same kind of speaker again. They traded hands a number of times, and in a couple of circumstances made different models of speakers that people liked, and they made a couple of things that I liked, but they weren't quite the same thing. And whenever Fane changed hands, I kind of went, is this going to be the time? Is this going to be the time? And I contacted them. I would try to contact them, and usually it got nowhere. But this time, somebody came to me and said, Fane has been taken over by new owners, and one of the people that's involved was involved in the original Fane company, and they want to know what you think. And I listened to the stuff, and I thought, well, there's something interesting going on here. I'm just glad that they're considering doing this. I have some thoughts. And the guy said, here's the number, call them, they'll listen to you. And so I called him, and I said, this is what I want, and this is how I see the market. And you can go call around or ask around and ask about me, and you'll find out that I know what I'm doing, or I'm totally insane, or I'm difficult to work with, or I'm easy to work with, or watch out, the guy's difficult and he's going to make your life miserable, and no, the guy really knows what he's talking about, and you're going to hear all of that. And so you're going to have to evaluate for yourself which is the real, which is going to be your experience. And and I'm not afraid of any of that. Just go out and find out. Go out and look into it. And I think your takeaway will be, at least I'm worth talking to. And they came back and they said, all right, we're listening. So I just sent them reams of emails, paragraphs and paragraphs, and pictures of me from the 70s with high watt stacks. And I really just laid out a story and a vision. And they came back and they said, yeah, we're in. So they have good engineering people there, and they have a lot of manufacturing skill, and they know how to make a good speaker. And so I worked with them, and they came up with some speakers that I really liked. And then when we finally got it all settled, what we were going to use, what we wanted to use for the Fryette stuff, and at the same time, the Sound City thing was starting to become a reality. And then we decided that this was going to be perfect, because we're going to be able to marry the two key pieces of the legacy sound of that era, the Sound City, the David Reeves based power amp design, and the Fane speakers, and that certain quality. And we were just going to be able to put it all together, and it was going to be really fun and exciting. So that
Awesome.
pretty much came to pass. To answer your question, and specifically about the transition from one to the other, there isn't a transition. The P50 is still a valid speaker. We still buy them. We still use them. They're still one of the main speakers that we offer in a couple of our cabs. And the thing that I really discovered after we got to the end of the engineering and design phase and into the production phase of the speaker, and actually A/B them, lo and behold, the Fane speaker was just a slight evolution of the P50. So apparently it occurs to me, what I had done is I went to Eminence and subconsciously got them to make what I considered the great British speaker sound. And when the Fanes were completed, I realized that Fane and us, Fane and Fryette, were in synchronicity about what the great British speaker sound,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to and other than Celestion, because the Celestion has a very specific personality and a recognizable style. It's a great speaker, and it's a great company. But the Fane thing is a little different thing, and it's how I hear things differently. So it just turned out that the P50 and the Fane are like the big and little brother of each other. They share a lot of similarities. And I was really kind of just surprised to discover how seamlessly the transition of one of our players, like Paige Hamilton, for example, makes from having used the P50 for all these years to the Fane speaker that he switched to, that I just asked him to just check out and let me know what you think. And he played it. And he went, yeah, it's pretty good. It's not the P50. It's pretty good though. And then I turned the gain down on the amp, and he played it, and he went, what did you do? And I said, well, what do you think? And he says, well, whatever you did, it fixed whatever I thought was wrong with it. And now they're perfect. They sound like just a little bit punchier, more expressive version of the P50s. Of course, I'll know at rehearsal, but I'm really hearing what I wanted to hear now. What did you do? And I said, I just turned down your gain down 2 notches. Because the Fane speaker has a little bit higher sensitivity and in the mid-range, so it sounds a little bit more saturated in the mids naturally. So you can turn the gain down and it sounds just as overdriven, but you can turn the gain down in the preamp and let the power amp work a little more, and you get this sort of broader, more open sound, but without departing from the personality of the amp and the cab the way we had them. So it's just really an evolution. It's a good speaker for the 212 cab, especially the fat bottom 212 cab, for example, because the P50s are use paper delicate. They're a 50-watt speaker, and when you hit 50 watts, that's all they can take. And they're great in 412 cabs when the cab is really well sealed, because the seal in the cab is what provides a tight cushion of air for the speaker to ride on, so it doesn't bottom out. And that's why it's that we don't have a lot of speakers being blown in a cab like that with paper voice coils, even though you're using with an ultra lead or 100 CL or another 100-watt amp. It holds up pretty well. In a 212 cab, not so much. If you're trying to use an ultra lead with a fat bottom 212, you just plain need more power handling capacity. And so the Fane 12s in the 212 cabinet hold up really well. So you can really pound the crap out of a 212 cab and get it just as monstrous of a sound as you would with a 412.
412, yeah.
But
That's
with
cool.
212s, so it just sort of like it seamlessly fits into our whole palette. It's not a different thing. It's not we've walked away from Eminence and replaced it with Fane. It's a whole different animal, but it's a similar part of the DNA and a similar kind of a formula. So it just fits right in, really.
And that's the Fane F70, right? Is that?
Yeah, right.
Right. I know when you first played me those speakers, man, they were fantastic.
Yeah, it's a good all-around speaker. It's not too much of anything.
It's great. Great.
Once it breaks, it has a funny sort of two-step break-in quality, where when you first play it, it sounds a little sharp to the ear, and then after about a half an hour to an hour, that goes away, and it starts getting really juicy. And then after a week or two, it's like it's all dialed in, and it's really cool the way that goes. They're an interesting company. They've got a lot of capability. They have very strong ideas about the way things should be done, and so do we. So we lock horns once in a while over that, and that's okay, because it's a relationship, and it's going to be a long one. So I'm okay with that, as long as when we work with people, everybody, the staff here, Erico and Neil and Evan and everybody has real distinct ideas about how things should sound and how they should be, and how we approach our gear and all that. And thankfully the guys at Fane are of the same mind, and sometimes they just draw the line and they say, you're getting a little over the edge, and we go, yeah, maybe so. It's okay.
So I have a question here before I dive in, though. Dave, do you have anything you want to ask before I dive into some other questions in the chat?
Man, I think you pretty much covered it, as I knew you would. The whole history, and like you said, he gets you talking and you'll keep going.
No, we're good. We're good. So this is a topic that I'm about to jump on that we could probably spend an entire show on talking about. So, is right. So Rev Tyler asks, and I know I have my own thoughts on this, but you guys certainly would be great to hear. He wants to know, what are your thoughts on digital modeling technology such as Fractal X Effects or Kemper?
Let me start.
Go ahead, Dave.
It doesn't smell right.
Ethically,
stealing my ad.
No, but we have the exact same thoughts on that. It's it can be a tool for people. It can be a good tool for some people, but for me, visually, it doesn't do it for me. I just don't, it's like you're staring at a computer. I mean, it's like, okay, it's a computer. Maybe it can sound good. Maybe it has some uses in traveling and different things where someone's got to take something portable. But it just doesn't float my boat so much You know, when I look at an old, like we were talking about high watts and how it looked and how you were talking about that, you know, you look at it and you went, oh man, that just looks cool. Or your Sound Cities, when you first brought, you know, when you first showed me the Sound Cities and I had a chance to play it and stuff. And, you know, I'm not scared of that. And you know, but you look at it, the Sound Cities that you're going to be making now, and you just look at them and go, God, that's cool looking. You know, I just, man, gotta have it. I want one.
Right.
As I've told you when I played it.
The Dave Friedman treatment is he plugs in a guitar, and plays an E chord, and it does it or it doesn't, and that's the end. That's it. If it does it, okay, I'll go dig into it. And if it doesn't, like, oh, that was fine. That was fun. Not for me. Next. But you can tell. And having objective people like that, because you get in your own. I love David Letterman had this great expression that you're just inhaling your own. You just get overcome by your own hot gases, I think he said. And you got to step outside of that and be able to take it on the chin, because it's just like making a record or writing a song. You know, you lose your objectivity because you've had your head wrapped around it so long. It's just natural that you're not objective anymore. You're married to every little single thing that goes on in there. And so Dave has a talent for just like slicing through that in one E chord. And
E or A or something like that, yeah.
B or A or whatever it is, but it's I've come to really appreciate the simplicity of that, because it's immediate. It's an immediate thing, and it doesn't require any long-winded explanation. It's just it's just his eyebrows went up or they didn't. Period. The end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's every guitar player that is consumed with the visceral experience of playing guitar. And there's that compared to work for hire. It's the best way I can say it. You know, you got to get paid, and you got a job to do, and you got to knock out some tracks or a part or a cue for a TV commercial or a TV series or a movie soundtrack or something. And you don't have the 18 space 500-pound racks of old to do it with. You've got all of that condensed down into a little tiny box. And frankly, there isn't a lot that separates an 18 space rack and a modeler from the standpoint of dynamic range, because the signal goes through so much processing that either it's latency or it's just loss of dynamic range, or it's a coloration that makes that it's phase shift. It's all the things that just sort of take the visceral playing experience and just sort of kind of grinds all that off. That where you compartmentalize that and say, I got a job to do, and this does the job. Like Dave said, it's a tool. You plug in, you know, you can dial in some sounds if you're good at dialing it in, and you get the job done. And probably very few people that listen to a finished project would listen to it and go, man, I wish you'd have done that with a tube amp, you know. And you can do it at late at night in the dark with everybody sleeping right around you, and you don't have to make any noise. And so there's all kinds of attractive reasons why that's a valid system, to a valid tool. But every guitar player that I talk to that's makes a distinction between getting a job done and just being thrilled with playing the instrument. And the amp and the guitar to me are of a piece. That's the instrument. When you're playing the whole instrument and you're getting really involved into it, like you have a cello between your legs, it's between your legs, it's up against your chest, you're wrapped completely around it. And the guitar amp analogy of that is you're wearing the guitar, but the amp is putting out this sound pressure level and it's going through you, and you feel that and you respond to that, and that's what gets your juices going. And modeling gear, that wasn't really intended to do that, and it doesn't do that. Hendrix was on Dick Cavett after he played a song, and Cavett asked him, "Why you play so loud?" And Hendrix said, "Because I'm trying to get through into the people's souls." And it's kind of an antiquated way of saying that that wall of sound. I'm transmitting that visceral playing experience into the audience, and you have to experience it as if you're where I'm standing right here. Mm-hmm. And he didn't play everybody talks about how loud he played. He didn't really play that loud, and he didn't turn his amps up all to 10. He was playing very clean, and there were a lot of amps on stage. Because you're moving around on stage, and you got to be, and 412 cabinets are beamy, so you got to be able to hear yourselves when you're running around on the stage. You got to be able to get feedback in different parts, and you got to be able to have enough power to get clean sounds in an era where PA systems weren't so red hot. Mm-hmm. So that was why all those amps and cabinets were on stage. It wasn't that you turned them all up and speaker cones were flying out of the cabinets. They were flying out of the cabinets because he was tearing them out with the headstock of his guitar. It wasn't because he was playing all that loud, but it was a big sonic wallop from the stage that enveloped the audience, and he believed that he was wrapping his performance around the audience, not just playing to them. And that's what you're doing when you're playing a guitar into an amp that snaps and responds, regardless if it's something like a deluxe has that quality, mm-hmm. or I've got my old treasured blackface concert amp. It's like a super reverb without the reverb, has that quality. You just play a Telecaster into it and play an E chord, and it goes ka-dong, I'm here. And that's like a defining feature of playing the instrument, and its personality that puts its imprint on you. And yeah, modeling gear it doesn't possess that quality. It just doesn't.
Yeah,
that's not a criticism at all. It's just a fact.
It's for me, I don't have a Kemper. I actually have a positive grid. I actually have it in front of me, positive grid bias head, which is pretty cool. I use it for recording and stuff. It's a powered head. The way I describe it is like tube amps are 3-dimensional, and these modeling things are 2-dimensional still. You don't, as far as feel, like you don't get that 3-dimensional tube feel when you have a really good tube amp. You're feeling it. It's interacting with you. It's, you're digging into their playing. It's reactive to your playing. They're still not there 100%. And no matter what anybody tells me about any of that, it's still, they're close. And in recording, they can sound great. And even live, I think they can sound great. But for me, I just don't think they're there 100%.
I kind of take that back in the live setting. I actually had the pleasure or displeasure, depends on how you look at it, of being at a tour and at a show where there were a band with amps, and then a band with modeling, and then another band with real amps, and another band with modeling, literally. And back to back, there was a marked difference in the real amp than the modeling amps. There was a weight and a just solidness about the tube amp in the live setting, the way it cut, where the other one sounded fine, but it just was kind of flat to me.
Yeah.
Was that and how was the modeler powered?
I think those are Kempers, so it was probably going just direct to house, to be honest.
Yeah, that's you know, there's a big part of playing live is that the front of house experience is really where all the SPL is. When I would go, when I would see Helmet perform, you could be on stage and practically carry on a conversation with the guys on stage, but they've got this gargantuan, giant dump truck of a sound careening off a cliff out front, because they get their sound right on stage and nice and balanced, and then they put it all in the front of house. Of course, they're using good gear and all of that, but they're not pummeling from their gear. It's coming from the front of house, you know. And you know, we went, Dave, you and I, we were at the AC/DC show at the Dodgers Stadium, and you know, we were next to this behind the sound booth. That was like, they brought me to my knees. They were pummeling it so loud. It was loud.
And the funny thing was, you know, I've seen AC/DC before also, always loud.
I've seen them too.
But it was outside. It was Dodger Stadium. This is Dodger Stadium. You know, sound outside goes away. You know, it goes up in the air and it goes, you know. There's nothing holding it in. Holy crap, yeah, it was loud still. So it was particularly loud.
My ears were bruised from how hard I was poking my fingers in my ears.
Yeah.
Because earplugs weren't cutting it.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it was it's pretty incredible. And from what I understand, from a friend of mine was the guitar tech, and he was just like on stage. He should hear it on stage.
I hope those guys wear ear protection, or at least Angus does.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Crazy. Well, going back to the modelers live, I think that on stage anyway, you just have to. There's two features about using modelers in the live environment. Number one is that there's a heck of a lot of deep diving and programming and tweaking to get it where you want to get it, and then there's a lot of work that you have to do in with the signal in order to get it to where it is credible live. And I'll give you an example. I'm working with the Deftones right now, and Carpenter uses 2 Axe-Fx units. So he's got the Axe-Fx outs, the XLR outs, going to front of house.
Yeah.
Then he's got the Axe-Fx feeding the power amps. And then the power amps have direct boxes on the speaker output jacks, in addition to the jacks that go to the speaker cabinets. And those direct boxes also go to front of house. And both Axe-Fx's are being used. And one of them is programmed, all the same song programs are in them, but one of them is EQ'd brighter and the other one is EQ'd fatter on the bottom end. And then they blend them somehow. And boy, is it an unbelievable, it sounds amazing. It sounds, I went to the rehearsal place and picked up the guitar and I hit one note. And it was like, what? It was right there. And but what a falderall of what an operation to get all that to be functional. And it's quite a feat, you know. you know, so once they've got it, you know, but it takes quite a bit of work. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to switch to the LX2 power amps, which are coming out soon. For anybody that's going to ask where the hell they are, they're on their way here. But the character of those power amps is slightly different than what they've been used to, and in order for them to boy, I'm blanking out, to make the transition from what they've got to the LX2 power amps, they have to go back in and tweak all the programs in both of the Axe-Fx's. And while I was there, I discovered that the pedal board that was going into the system had a phase issue, and I discovered that the power amps that they were using at the time, whose name I won't mention, the outputs of the power amp were not in phase with the inputs, so that put them out of phase with the Axe-Fx direct feeds. And so they had all kinds of phasing issues, and they were just wondering why the sound was really thin and tweaky in some places, and it was totally related to the position of the gear on the stage with respect to with the sound system and the size of the venue and all that, and it was just driving them nuts. And I went through and analyzed the whole thing, and I said, your primary thing is all the phase issues you have, and the LX2s are going to be in phase with respect to the input and the output, and that's going to probably solve a lot of your issues. And they were mystified at first, and when I sort of explained it all to them, I actually did a video demonstrating them what was happening, and they looked at that and they went, "Oh, that answers all the questions that we've been struggling with about why we keep having these issues." And
but generally speaking, most good front of house engineers catch the phase, especially if the power amps are flip phase. Okay, I understand that, but they normally, did they have it mic'd also or no?
I think they do.
So there's three sources then. So there's the XLR out of the Axe-Fx, and then the XLR out of the DI that's right before the power, or after the power amp, or whatever it is. And then if they have it mic'd also, then you're talking about a whole slightly out of phase.
and the DI boxes have phase switches, so if they accidentally get switched, it drives them crazy until they figure out where's the source of the problem, because there's so many places to look.
Right.
So yeah, but I mean, the same stuff can occur with all analog gear too. If you've got a really complex setup like that.
If you have a if you're blending two amplifiers and you have two multi-channel amps, or you have maybe one static amp that isn't multi-channel, it's a single channel, but then you're using different channels on a channel switching amp and you're blending them together. Well, every channel maybe on your amplifier, on your channel switching amp, could be flipped phase from the other channel.
Right.
So, and most average people don't understand how to make that work, or even what's going on. Why does it get so thin when I go to my channel number 2 when I have my Fender on at the same time? Well, it's because it's out of phase. And with me developing systems and stuff, I know that, and then we generally add like a little phase reversal loop on a switcher or something, so that they can turn that loop on and it's in front of that one amp, and it'll flip the phase, so you can proper phase between the two amplifiers, basically. So.
Yeah.
But it's complicated, man. It's complicated when you start doing this stuff, and people start blending stuff and putting these rigs together, these complex things, and then some people might have some pedals that are in front of one amp only and not the other amp. Well, guess what? There's a chance that those pedals are out of phase too.
That's right.
And worse yet, some pedals aren't completely 180 degrees out of phase. So like an EP booster, for instance, is not, there's phase shift, but not 180 degrees. So don't ever blend that with something. Just have it in front of everything. It sounds really good. It's a cool pedal, but don't try to blend it with something.
Interesting.
That's not, And then most people don't even hear it. And I'm like really sensitive to like slightly out of phase sounding. That comb filtering effect you get.
Yeah.
And I can literally hear the rig and hear the hiss of the rig and go, it's out of phase or partially out of phase, because you can just hear the comb filtering of it, and you just hear it's like that cocked wah and kind of that that thing, and it's just like, no, fix that, please.
That's funny. We've got a question here. We just touched on pedals, and just so you know, we're at about 2.5 hours in. So at the start of this, Steve, you said you didn't think you can go 3 hours. You're almost there.
It goes quick.
It does. It does go.
Yeah, it sounds like my wife. No, you're not going to dinner because you know what time it is. The restaurants are all closed. I thought it was only 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So what's that?
I'm good. You said you had a subject that
So
brought up?
since they asked, Supermarket says, question, Steve, favorite pedal effect that you used in the 70s, the one that had the mojo.
Well, I'm not a pedal hater. I was accused by a Russian guy of exhibiting a pedal hatred. And that's exactly what
I can only guess who that is.
Yeah, you know who it is. And when we came to the NAMM show with our first pedal, he came up to me and goes, now that your pedal hatred has ended. And I'm like, no, it's not pedal hatred. I did make an honest effort to get along with pedals, but it never really worked for me. And I'm not the greatest player on the planet. I don't have great technique. I'm very sloppy. I pride myself in having good finger tone, and like Dave, I can make a sounding E chord, with a lot of blam to it and a lot of ka-chang, and I take a lot of pride in that. It's sort of the Keith Richards mentality of, hey, it's what it is.
What my friend who was working for us in NAMM that I brought in the booth, Dave Black, big tall guy, black hair.
Yeah.
He goes, it's like I'm a street guitar player, is what it's called.
Right.
He goes, I'm a street guitar player from Detroit. I can't touch some of the chops of these other guys, but I do my thing. And and he does it well.
And that was the thing. I always had. Thank you. That was the thing that I just really made me feel great when I did gigs. There's other guitar players that come up to me and they say, "Man, you really sound great," and I never took it as a "you suck, but your tone is pretty good." I took it at face value, because really that's what I spent a lot of time going for, and a detail and a width and this and punch, and especially with the high watts that didn't distort very much, it was difficult because they also didn't. We did things then, before there were things like attenuators around. We did things like taking a moving blanket and putting it over the top two speakers of a 412 cab. Or putting a moving blanket over the cab entirely and miking it. So put a mic in front of the speaker and then throw a moving blanket over it, like you'd do in a studio, I guess. Only we did it live on stage, and then you'd hear it back in the monitors, and that's how you heard your amp, because it was just too loud to turn it up to get that sound. And at that time, what pedals were out? Geez, it was a phase 90. It was a wah. It was the fuzz face. The Univox Super Fuzz was out. That was popular. And I mean, there were a bunch of things like that. There was the MXR. What was the MXR? Distortion Plus.
Yeah.
I tried that for a while.
Was the Fox Tone Machine out then in the 70s?
Fox Tone Machine was out.
That's my favorite from the 70s.
And so I have to go back and think what was working for me and why. And what ended up working for me, the MXR had the compressor. What was it called?
Dynacomp.
The Dynacomp, yeah.
Yep.
So what I ended up doing earlier on was using a Dynacomp, but the way I used it was most people turned it on for rhythm and turned it off for solos, and I turned it off for rhythm and turned it on for solos.
You use it as a boost.
I used it as a boost and used a little bit of its compression, because when I tried to use distortion pedals, they compressed the sound too much, and that's what I really liked about the high watts, and they took too much of that away. And then I was mostly a Les Paul guy, but then when I started using a Strat, it didn't have enough output for the high watts to really push the front end, and so I got an LPB1. Electro-Harmonix LPB1, which is just a straight little single transistor boost, again, just a straight boost. And I had, they were meant to be plugged into there were a box that had the jack directly on the box, and you plug it into the end of your guitar, and then the cable into your amp. And I reversed the connections so that the box was plugged into it was sitting by the amp and not at the guitar. So I only used it when I was using the Strat. I didn't use it with Les Paul. When I put the Strat on, I hit the LPB1 on and boosted it about 6 dB, and that worked for me. And then by that time, I had fashioned my own attenuator, which was a struggle. It was either not enough or too much, like attenuators have always been. The right notch setting. It was either just too much or not enough. And I also tried a Variac with the high watts, and that worked to a small degree too. But you know, those things work under very controlled circumstances, and live is like the least controlled environment that you can be in, because you know, all kinds of things are going on live. You're playing, you're drinking, you're singing, you're forgetting your parts, you're hanging out with your buddies, the sound man is giving you shit. You know, all the things that go on live at a gig. The audience size changes, and so how much of the sound that you create is absorbed by the audience changes during the course of a night. There's all these kinds of variables going on all the time, so there's never any sense of control over the whole thing, or there never was for me. And pedals never helped that. Pedals were just, you know, colors to me, and I didn't really care that much for all those colors. I just didn't really have that much use for it. I liked to go for a core sound, and then I used variations of that sound, a cleaner version and a more gainy version, and I felt that you sort of, especially in cover bands anyway, when you're playing different songs, it wasn't like you use a different pedal for a different song. You play a different nuance to accommodate the style of the player that played the original track on the various songs. So it was more of a playing experience than having all these pedals. And when I did try to build a big pedal board, which was around the 80s, I just sort of got sucked into it because that's what everybody was doing, you know, and it was basically my lifeblood at Valley Arts. I had built a buffer, and I built a power supply. At Valley Arts, I designed and built a power supply that we sold at Valley Arts called the Valley Arts Power Supply, and I designed and built a buffer for pedals, for all that. And we built all of our own hardware to build those things, and so I got sucked into it. So I started buying stuff, and I started putting electronics on board in the guitar, and you know, I went through a whole phase, but it was a phase. It was most assuredly a phase, and when, and like all phases, you know, I rebelled against it and stripped everything all back down to nothing, not even reverb or delay. I used to use tube echo plexes for a little slap. I got rid of everything and went just straight, dry, down the middle, you know, and of course that worked great in the punk rock bands I was in the Dickies. Hey Dave, you mentioned about loading amps.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did with the Dickies. I had a Super Champ.
Ah.
And I had a load resistor in the back of it, and it had the EV10. I think they came with two versions. They had
Right.
the regular 10 and the EV10, Force 10, and I had that, and it had 6v6s, and I put 6L6. I put EL34s in it and tweaked the bias a little bit, and so it had the speaker with its 1/4-inch plug on the back of it, and there was a load resistor that had a 1/4-inch plug hanging off of it. So when I was rehearsing, or depending on the environment, I would use just Super Champ by itself. But when I toured with them, I took that Super Champ with me on the road, and I used the dummy load, and then came out of the speaker output and sent that to. I just said, get me whatever. You know, we were renting gear on the road, so when we'd go on the East Coast or something, we just get from SR. What do you want, Marshall's Mesa? I don't care. Anything with an effects return, I don't care. And that's what I used. And my safe zone was that Super Champ set a certain way, and you know
Super
that
Champ
band
is
was
great
just,
amp, man.
that was a great amp, and it had a right kind of drive. And putting the EL34s in it gave it a little bark. It didn't give it any more power. It didn't really help the overall sound. It just gave it a little bit of that edgy bark, which is all I wanted. And I didn't have to worry about replacing them because they were more reliable. And I just thrashed that amp, and I just, you know, I took it everywhere, and I always sounded the same at every gig, no matter what amp that we had rented for the backline. I was like in my safe zone. I had an Esquire with a single pickup on it, and a volume control and a treble control, and the Super Champ, and whatever I was playing through. And when we played in town, I used I had 100-watt Marshall half stacks, and I had 100-watt high watt half stacks, and I used one or the other, just depending on my mood. And that was just the greatest thing that I discovered, is I just have my little self-contained sound right here, and I can make it bigger and I can make it smaller. And
That's great.
And so when people email me, it's like, what? I've been waiting for the Power Station for 20 or 30 years, and I'm like, yeah, I just stumbled backwards on it myself after practically making it a dozen different times over the past 30 years. It just finally took, you know, my brain finally woke up and went, yeah, you should finish this.
I got a question for you on that with the Power Station. Can it be used with a combo?
Yeah. And the only limitation is how big this, you know, how much power the speaker in the combo can handle. You know, so if you've got a little amp and you want to make it more powerful, if you want to just use that amp's internal speaker, then you have to keep it within reason. But
if you want to make it, if you want to attenuate it, though,
yeah, it's great. It's great for that.
All right.
Because you keep you using the internal speaker, and you keep sort of all the elemental sort of qualities of the speaker in the cab and all that intact, and just turn the volume down a little bit. It's a great way to strike the right balance between power and volume.
Great. So we were talking about phases before, right? You were saying that you went through your effects pedal phase. Well, we got a question about phases. This is a good question, actually. Jay Moreno asked, is there a device to check phase problems besides hearing?
You got that, Dave?
Yeah, well, there is. I've seen sound guys use it before. It's not something that you can, you're probably not just going to go out and buy it because it's a little expensive and stuff. But I mean, you can do it if you're in a recording environment or something. You can do it pretty easy if you really want to see what your phase issues might be. Is you can record both lines that you're using, and you can actually look at the waveforms, expand the waveforms, and you can see if they're not lined up exactly in the center. You can totally see they're out of phase. But I mean, sound guys generally use this. There's a phase checker where they thump a thump through an amp, and they can check the phase of what's coming out of the speakers. But you know what? I don't have one either, so I don't really know where to even buy one. But you know, you can generally you stand between two speakers, you'll hear when it's in and out of phase. I mean, it's like the low end goes away and it has this kind of swirly sound if you're standing right between the speakers if it's out of phase.
And typically, you wouldn't have a phase issue unless you're using two amps or more, 2 or more amps.
Yeah,
right?
correct.
You'll hear it. The volume will just like drop way down and get thin, and get very honky sounding, and then you know you gotta knowing exactly. I think knowing exactly where to approach problem solving on a phase issue, that's more skill. That's like being in front of it and knowing where to look.
Yeah. Advanced technique.
There's not a tool that's going to help you through that. If you've got two signals and you want to see their phase relationship, there's, like Dave said, you can either, if you have a scope, you can do it. There's boxes that will tell you if there's a phase issue, but those are very specific. You basically got to know that you've got a little bit of a process to go through, to a trial and error process to sift through.
We got another question here for Supermarket. It says, question, Steve, personal favorite power tube to use?
Yeah, I saw that, and I also like this one. Sovtek tubes suck. I love those sort of, and no disrespect to you, Frank Quinn. I love those sort of blanket statements, and probably somebody had a bad experience, you know, with a Sovtek, or maybe a bad experience in which a Sovtek tube was involved, but not necessarily the problem. All kinds of things happen. I don't. First of all, power tubes, to me, I don't treat them as little tone bottles. To me, they're more like brands of pistons. And there are pistons that are designed for better gas mileage, or more efficient burning, or higher compression, or lighter weight, you know, lower rotational inertia. And you know, all these different tubes have their reason to exist and their specific performance parameters. And do they have a tone necessarily? In the context of the amplifier that they're used in, they have a personality and a sonic sort of footprint that you can identify. But if you think about it for a second, the reason that EL84s sound very similar in lots of different amps is because all of those amps are operating at about the same power rating, at roughly the same plate voltage, biased approximately the same, and putting out approximately the same power output. So naturally, every amp that you hear with EL34s and or EL84s is going to have that EL84 quality, because all of those amps have similar design aspects that give them that quality. So it's really the amp that has that quality, not necessarily the tube. And we made a little game of that years ago when the Deliverance came out. We could have done it with EL34s, but we decided to do it with KT88s, because I just wanted to make a statement about tube sound. And there were a lot of people when they first heard the Deliverance that just thought, wow, this is just like a really great stripped down EL34 sound. So what kind of EL34s are you using? We're using Sovtek KT8s. And like, no way. And so you use transformer design and plate voltage and bias and style of bias fixed versus self-biasing, and the behavior of the phase inverter stage. You use all these tools to massage the behavior of of a power tube, but in order to get the sonic result that you're looking for. And Frank says, I find a big difference using Self-Tech to a good tube. There is a difference in tone. The difference is in the manufacturing of the tube. Now, we've been using, first of all, let's talk about Self-Tech for a second. Self-Tech is a brand name, and that brand of tubes are made in a factory in Russia called Expo. And that factory makes Self-Tech tubes. It makes Tungsol. It makes Gold Lion. It makes Electro Harmonics. It makes the Mullard reissues. They make a plethora of tubes out of that same factory, all on the same machinery, all by the same people. And there is even a there's a Svetlana model that comes out of that. And that's why people make the distinction between Svetlana and Wing C, because the Wing C is made in a different factory. Now, the Wing C tube does have a different sonic quality. It tends to be a little brighter and crisper, and some people like that real upfront, in-your-face sound. I do, but I also like a richer, rounder sound, and that's why we use the Mullards, which are made in the same factory as the Self-Tech EL34s. That's why we use those. So now, do certain models of tubes out of a manufacturer suck? Sure. Now, when I was at Valley Arts, and before that, when I was working in repair shops in Seattle, we bought American and British-made tubes, like over the counter, all the time for repairs. And shock, word to your mother, whatever, we encountered the same difficulties with production tubes then as we do production tubes now. There's nothing different about it. All the tubes that were manufactured in America and in Europe in the 60s and 70s were not the Holy Grail, any more than all the tubes that are manufactured these days are all the Holy Grail. There's good ones and there's bad ones. There's good runs and there's bad runs. There's tubes that we like the performance better than others in some cases. And when I was at Valley Arts, you could count on RCA 12AX7s to ring like church bells. You could count on Sylvania 6CA7s to have a little mechanical rattle inside. If you use them in combos, they were a pain in the ass. It hasn't, none of that really has changed. The only thing that has changed is where they are made, and also the idea that new old stock tubes, sure, there are some old tubes that were never used that are 50 years old, and you can say these tubes are 50 years old, they're still kicking. Well, if they're new old stock tubes, it's very likely that they spent their first 40 years in a box. And so you've really only used them for 10 years, and they probably last just as long as any other tube that runs for 2 years. And I can't tell you how many amplifiers that we get in for, over our 30-year span of producing amplifiers that just come in for normal maintenance. They have the original tubes in them that were in the amps when the customer bought them, or when the person that they bought the amp from bought them, and they're still in pretty good shape. So the new old stock versus modern tube, there's this just wild performance and lifetime difference is pretty much a myth that I'm happy to try to dispel, even though I'm probably going to get a lot of pushback on it, and fine. But I've been living and breathing this stuff since I was 12 years old, 10, and I think I speak from a little bit of experience in that regard, because the tubes that are the Holy Grail new old stock things now are just the over-the-counter stuff that we bought without thinking about it and threw them in the garbage when they were a year old without thinking about it, 30, 40 years ago. and it's we used the Sovtek KT88s for 15 years before we switched to electroharmonic. And the reason we switched to electroharmonic is because they stopped making the Sovtek version, and we had really good life out of them, and people obviously like the sound of the amps. And so which is my favorite tube? The ones that are consistent, easy to get anywhere that you go, reasonable in cost, and have a reasonable lifespan. And what I mean is when you buy them, when we sell an amplifier, and you go out and you beat the amp up and you do what I did when I was touring all the time, is routinely pour a margarita in the top of the amp once a week. You know, you have to be out on the road and you have to be able to grab replacement parts on the fly. And a real good solid tube choice involves, can I get a quartet in you know, Kansas City on a Tuesday night, if you know, in a pinch. And so that's really important. And do I want to pay an extra $20 for a tube just because of the name on the bottle and all that stuff? So we look for the stuff that we know is going to be in consistent, continuous production, that's easy to get, that performs consistently time after time, that makes it through our QC process consistently, week after week, month after month, year after year. And once we find something that meets that criteria, we're really hard pressed to get pushed off of it unless there is a real compelling reason to do so. And so far, the only real compelling reasons to do that have been because the factory did something drastic that caused the quality to go way, way down. Happens, not very often, but it happens. Or did they just discontinue it? The Wing C tube that everybody likes right now, or really liked, it was much more popular 10 years ago or even 8 years ago. But that tube had a really rough birth. It was a terrible tube when it first came out, and it went through a lot of revisions. And two tube distribution companies went bankrupt during the time that tube was in development. So where it came from, who was the source, who was actually manufacturing it, there were all these questions. And with regard to distribution, some of them came from an official distributor, and in Russia, some of them were sold out the back door illegally, and another person brought them back into the gray market and sold them as official distributor, and they weren't. And you never knew which were the ones that the factory stood behind and which weren't. And that very same thing happened with Siemens tubes in the 70s. And China was under embargo and Russia was under embargo, and both of those countries were manufacturing tubes. We were buying them with names like Amperex Holland stamped on them because they were getting moved around to different countries under different names to get past the embargo. So a lot of people wonder, why does this piece of crap tube have Amperex Holland? I thought Amperex Holland were great tubes. Well, a lot of times Amperex Holland tubes were just a front for Russian tubes or Chinese tubes that were getting sold on the black market. You know, so it's not it. And when RCA stopped producing tubes in the U.S., they started buying tubes from Siemens or RFT, which was branded Siemens in Germany, but they were actually produced in East Germany under the Siemens name, but they were sold in the U.S. as RCA EL34s. They were skinny bottle EL34s. They were RFT EL34s, but they were branded RCA. And RCA sold tubes to Sylvania. They were selling tubes to each other while they were dismantling their production procedures and laying off people and shutting down old broken down tooling. They were scrambling just to meet and fill leftover purchase orders and get that business wrapped up. And all of that tube mystique that's going on now is wrapped up in all these sort of questionable brands
practices.
and yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I can't subscribe to any of that new old stock stuff, or which is the ideal tube. There's a lot of good stuff out there. There's a lot of consistent stuff out there. It's a matter of taste. You love it, you don't love it, and great. And we just find the things that we think that work well consistently over time, and we stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, in larger production, consistency, the same thing over and over again, and tubes that are reliable. And I'm not sure what tube that is yet, but we have two different brands we use, two different kinds of tubes, and it depends. There can be bad batches from these manufacturers also, that you start getting a bad batch, and boy, you don't see it at first, but you see it 3 months later, when you already have lots of amps in the field, and all of a sudden it's like,
that's right.
Oh,
that's right.
Great.
You start getting the phone calls.
Yeah, you start getting the phone calls and stuff, and it's like 99% of all amplifier problems generally are something revolving around the tubes.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Randall Aiken's with us. That's cool.
Hey, Randall, how are you? So it's again, people ask me sometimes, well, why do you use those tubes? Why do you use that? Why do you use JJ preamp tubes in your first slot in your amp? Well, it's because I can't find anything in quantity that's low enough microphonic for the first stage. That's why. It's real simple.
Mm-hmm.
That I can pretty much use almost the entire box of 100 tubes, and with very few, if a box of Chinese 12AX7s in the first slot, I'll get 4 out of 100. Or that'll work.
That's right.
Or like tongue soles I was using for a while, I'd get maybe 30 to 40% of the box that I could use. But I didn't use them anywhere else. So then the rest of the box is just like waste, it's like, so that wasn't a good choice either. So, I mean, it was a pretty good sounding tube, but
it's microphonic.
Tried WBs for a while too. They work to a certain extent, but again, it depends on how many amplifiers you're producing, and smaller batches of amps, you can get away with certain things, and you can do this. But if you're producing large numbers a year, then it's like, what's going to work?
And also which supplier is going to do the best job of screening out the bad ones when you're buying in quantity that you can have good reliability. But even having said all
I
that,
haven't figured that out either.
It's an ongoing process.
But
having said all that, we've been using the Chinese 12AX7s since 1989. I mean, since 1989, the same tube.
Yeah.
Different suppliers call it 5th generation, 8th generation, 12. I don't even know what all that generation stuff is. And if you ask the tube factory, what does that mean? They go, we don't call them that. We don't even know what they're talking about. Some suppliers just use that as a marketing point. But and this happens every time, as soon as we start talking about 2150s, the next day a 2150 will come in from service that's got the original tubes in it from 1989, 1990, 1991. And the preamp, those Chinese 12AX7s and 12AU7s or whatever we used in there, generally don't need to be changed. Same with the Pitfall heads, Ultra Leads come in, CLXs, the power amps. Customers occasionally, if they're real particular about it, I want all the tubes changed, even if they don't need it. Yeah, even if they don't need it. Okay, but we do have a policy of not changing tubes unless they're needed. So when somebody ships an amp here to get serviced, it's usually power tubes because that's the ones that do all the work. And for the most part, it's the power tubes and V1 that get replaced. And year after year, and then the amp comes in 2 or 3 years later, and it's still got those tubes in it, and they're still good. And we replace V1 and the power tubes, and out it goes again for another couple of years. And people don't even realize. We'll have somebody will call up and go, I just had my amp to you guys a couple of months ago for service, and already it's getting weak. Already it needs new tubes again. And okay, give me your name. Look it up on our service history, and oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, we did work on that in February of 1998.
Yeah.
Or March of 2009, and there's this silence on the phone for a second. It's like, really? It's been that long? And it's hysterical. It happens all the time.
Completely non-guitar related, but I had this recently happen with my pool motor. Like I've had to replace this thing in my house. I don't know. Pool motors just seem to die every couple of years. So I could have sworn, I called the pool guy up. It died. I call him up. I said, I just got this thing from you. Like what? Like 3 months ago, 4 months ago? It's dead. He's like, you think it was 3 or 4 months ago? I go, yeah. And he looks it up. He goes, yeah, it was like a year and a half ago. I'm like, all right. Even still, it shouldn't be dead, but
Yeah, a year and a half in a pool motor. I don't know.
Yeah,
that seems a little questionable.
Yeah, they don't last very long, unfortunately. But
maybe they're not made as well. It's funny that a lot of the pools that I've had, the original motor was still there from way long time ago, and then it finally died. But I mean, like 25 years later or something.
Oh wow, yeah.
So
yeah, well, actually, the interesting part was if my pool guy was on here, I actually do my pool myself, but the guy who fixed it, the motor, he actually said to me, he's like, yeah, you just had a ton of leaves in there, and that's why you killed it. I'm like, oh.
Aha.
So yeah, so that was the reason. It wasn't the motor's fault.
You burned it out
this particular time. Yeah. So, but so let's check back in the chat and see what else we got. We don't want to talk. No one wants to hear about my freaking pool. Let's see. We've got Randall says, "Hey, Steve and Dave, my favorite 2-amp gurus."
Thank you, Ken. I think we typed that in there.
Oh, you did. Oh, you guys already wrote that.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So you got.
Well, that's really kind. I got to say, Randall is one of the guys that there was an article on one of the forums about a lot of boutique amp companies where people are just like capacitor changers and just tweak existing designs and don't know much, and mentioned me and might have been Dave, I don't remember, and a couple of other people that actually had chops that know how to design amps. And I got to say, Randall is one of those guys.
Oh, absolutely.
He really does know the engineering stuff. It's probably spooky. He's probably forgotten more stuff than I know. So there's a
mutual admiration.
That guy is somebody who I have a lot of respect for.
Oh, cool. Well, it's awesome that he's watching.
I agree.
Very cool. Maybe he'll come on the show one day.
Hey, yeah, Randall, you want to come on the show?
Yeah.
I'd watch that.
Not to put him on the spot, but if Randall, if you want to come on, we got an open invitation for you.
You're welcome.
Exactly. So Randall says I paid Steve to say that. And Michael Bishop's pissing me off saying I had a pool motor last 20 years. All right, great, man. Thanks.
Rub it in.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe you should have your pool guy do your pool.
I know. That's probably
Maybe the motor will last 20 years then.
That's probably the better option. Yeah. Good advice. So I think we've hit most of all the questions, if not all of them, and we're at like 2 hours and actually, how long are we going? Actually, it's almost 3 hours here. So
yeah.
So we're good. Dave, is there any other questions that you had or wanted to cover?
I think we covered a good fair share here.
Yeah, I think we did. And so, Steve, why don't you tell us in closing, why don't you tell us where people can reach you and tell us about your products and where people can buy your products?
Okay, so everything that we make we either sell direct or through dealers, and a lot of the stuff is available through Musician's Friend. It's available through the Guitar Guru Network, which guys have been doing a great job. They're great people to deal with, and they're real hands-on. I like that. And there are some models that we still produce that don't appear to be available, although they are. Just about everything that we've always made in regular rotation, we still produce, like the CL series amps, the Ultra Lead, and the CLX, the 252 and 292 power amps, and somebody here, Kelly, I think, asked about the Deliverance. They're not. They may not be shown on the web on our website or shown as available, but they are. Just pretty much all of that stuff is available either from one of the established outlets or from us directly or by special order. And our web store is at fryette.com, FRYETTE.com. And
Sound City, the Sound City amps, when are they going to be available?
Sound City is going to be available pretty soon. We're just getting ready to go into production now. I spent a little bit more time on getting the cabinets just detailed right. Electronically, that was all done a year ago. We've just been trying to get the cabinets just to have this certain look and vibe, and we've got it all nailed down and really tight and looking really just good enough to eat. So I'm really happy with the way they came out. And then
where's mine?
And then yeah, right. And then in the course of that, I struck upon this idea to do the 30-watt Sound City with the KT66 as the combo, and that's just came out so nice.
That sounded great.
So where the website is soundcityamp.com is about to go live any day, probably next week. And those are going to be available through select independent dealers. And let's see what else it must be about time.
I think you got it all.
I think you got it all there, Steve.
Yeah. Everybody,
right,
if you guys need anything, just reach out to Steve. I'll put
and any technical stuff, support at fryette.com for any technical issues, either with the web store or with dealers, who to contact, or servicing. One thing I want to say about servicing, and this is really important, it's difficult to get consistently reliable servicing out in the field because we don't have an official network of repair places out there. And the reason we don't is because they just don't see our stuff that often. I don't mean to pat myself on the back. It's just the fact that there isn't that much repair work for our gear out there in the field. So there aren't that many people out there that are that familiar with it. So what we do is we have a $60 flat service fee for repairs that are sent here. And we turn them around in a couple of days. So it's $60 plus parts for virtually any repair, as long as the amp is pretty much factory stock and wasn't in a fire. I mean, if it's not ridiculous, if it's just normal servicing, $60 plus parts does it. And the turnaround time is a couple of days. So by the time you take it to a local shop that's unfamiliar with it, that probably doesn't want to take it on, that needs a lot of feedback from us to help them sort of troubleshoot through it, and then you end up paying for hours of time. It's a lot more convenient and affordable and reliable to just send it here. And so it's busy here, but we do encourage people, just if it's something that they just want to make sure that it gets done right, we're here to do it right. And we don't charge an arm and a leg to do it, because we want to make sure that the stuff lasts out there in the field and continues to perform properly, and that people don't throw a lot of money down the drain trying to get a poor repair done expensively when you can get a reasonably priced repair done quickly and properly. So that's just, I wanted to throw that out there. As far as servicing gear, we're always available to do that.
Well,
you mean the phone calls phone calls you get from a tech that's looking at one of your products and go, yeah, I think I got a bad power transformer, and then you're like, are you sure about that? What have you done? Why do you think it's the power transformer? And it turns out it's a blown filter cap.
We have a policy. we have a limited return policy on power transformers and output transformers because of the number of transformers that get ordered, only to get an email or a phone call a few days later asking if it can be returned because that wasn't the problem. And we said, that's not the problem. That's one of two things that consistently happen. Number one, an order for a replacement transformer that wasn't necessary, or B, a demand for a schematic from a shop that all they got by getting the schematic was more confusion because they have to fish through it and figure out, they still have to learn how the amp is designed and what the schematic means and where to look, and all that stuff. Is just ordering a schematic doesn't automatically mean that you're going to get a qualified repair. It just means that you're going to get a guy with a schematic that now has got 10 more questions that he wants to ask us. So in effect, we're doing the repair for the guy so that he can charge you for all the time that he spent talking to us to do the repair.
Right.
Now, there are times when it's not always convenient to send an amp here, and we want to make the local guy be the hero as much as possible. If he's got the skill and the test equipment, and the experience to do it, I'm all for it. But that's not always the case, and no. we do get a little frustration from some of the customers that, why won't you send my tech a schematic? And they have to understand that there are valid reasons for trying to encourage the customer to get the unit sent to either someplace or here to help facilitate an effective, affordable, reliable repair. And it doesn't mean just handing a schematic to every guy that asks for one.
Yeah, of course. And you know what? You go into the source, right? You're going to get it done right. And it's a reasonable price. I mean, if they have to ship it, there might be some costs added to that. But at the end of the day, it's going to be right, And when you're paying, for a nice quality amp, don't take risks bringing it to somebody who.
Hey, can I light it up?
Yeah.
On one more little sort of pet peeve.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, let's do it.
Go for it.
Cap jobs.
Oh, fuck.
Just because an amp is 20 years old doesn't automatically mean it needs a cap job. And so I always tell people this, and I want to just use this platform as an opportunity to drive this home a little bit more. When you take your amplifier, when you take any of the amplifiers that we have designed, when you take it to a shop and the guy tells you he wants to do a cap job on it, please contact us first, and let's discuss it, because 9 times out of 10 it doesn't need it, and 5 times out of 10 the capacitors that are going to get used in the repair are not as good as the ones that are 10 years or 20 years old that are in there. And the reason is because a lot of aftermarket companies are selling pretty spiffy looking capacitors that look like the right color and the right size and shape, but their specs are all over the map and the tolerances are really far off. Just because they look good and just because they cost a fair amount of money doesn't mean that they're an equivalent replacement part. So that's the reason that I balk against just a default to the cap job, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to resolder all the solder joints and I'm going to replace all the caps. That doesn't really necessarily get you anywhere. And a lot of times it's just a lot of money spent for very little, if no improvement and possibly a reduction in performance.
All right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember I think there's some video online of someone or somewhere I saw of someone giving a filter cap job to a like a Bogner made in recent years, and I'm like, going, wait, why? Why? It's not gonna no.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you get an old fender and the caps are exploding, out the top of them, and it's like, okay, we can replace these now. Yeah, no, it doesn't. I agree with everything you say.
There are guys that read specs and say, well, you should really replace the caps because they're only good for 3 years anyway. It even says so on the specs. Well, if you actually read the data sheet, it says that the lifetime of 3 years or 5 years or something is based on running the amp at probably 100% past its maximum rated values continuously. And based on that, they extrapolate that under those conditions, it would last 3 years. But no guitar amp runs at even a percentage of that high. So that's why it's not unusual. It's normal for filter capacitors that are 20, 30, and 40 years old to be performing perfectly fine, especially if the amp has been used consistently, not the other way around. A consistently used, constantly played, constantly turned on amplifier has got better conditioned filter caps than an amp that has been stored for 10, 20 years.
That's a great point too. That's awesome.
And another thing on some repair guys. I mean, I'll call out a couple that are great. We have a great guy that we use in the UK, and a guy named Rob Moss at RJ Ampworks. He's great. I mean, I can't say good enough things about him. He's been stupendous there.
Good to know.
So if you ever need him. I think he used to work at Orange for a long time, and or something along the lines of that. And like he has his own repair business now, but he knows what he's doing. He understands. He doesn't ask for schematics. And of course Nashville Amp Service too in Nashville. Todd Sharp. That company does a great job. Great job.
Todd's a great guy.
Yeah, and he does a great job. And they repaired an amp for me once, and one of my amps, and the guy already had it before I even talked to him. It was like, oh yeah, it was just this capacitor. Boom, done, finished. And he just had it right away and didn't ask me any questions, nothing. That was great.
Hey, Mark at Victoria is good too. He's like a no nonsense, like I fix your amp, you pay me, you go away kind of guy. I like that.
Oh, good, yeah, cool. That's cool. I mean, it's always good to find really good guys that know what they're doing. I don't know them all, so I'm compiling certain places in certain areas that hopefully we can use in the future for certain things.
Yep.
All right. Well, good stuff, guys. For everybody who's watching, I just want to let you know that in the more info section on the video, I will be, in all of our videos, we will be listing the time stamps and the topics that we talk about. So for this full 3-hour and 20-minute bonanza that we just had, we will have the entire documented agenda that we talked about sometime tomorrow. Or in the more info section as you watch this video. So if you want to just jump ahead or jump behind or whatever, you'll be able to have that. Our next show is going to be June 2nd, right, Dave?
Yep, I think so. Yeah, it's going to be 3 weeks instead of 2, guys.
Yep, so we got a 3-week break, but we have 2 surprise guests, I believe 2, right, Dave? Mm-hmm. And we won't be revealing those 2 surprise guests for a little while, but it's awesome. I can't wait to announce it. We'll be doing that about a week before the show. And you guys catch us. I'll be putting stuff on social media, so you'll be able to see it. Dave and I will be sharing that stuff. Keep you all posted. Reach out to Steve Fryette. Pick up his products. I know I'm going to be getting the Power Station. And check out Sound City Amps as well. Steve, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And you mind if I plug my my Premier Guitar Speaker Geeks articles that comes out? I write an article for Premier Guitar.
Oh, please do.
On a regular basis. And so my next article will be coming out in a few weeks, and it's just deep dive speaker tweakery. So enjoy that.
Cool.
Oh,
I actually,
I didn't even know about that.
I actually read last month's article, or at least most of it, about vintage amps versus modern amps, and how vintage amps are not necessarily always better. Right? That was a good article.
Oh, that was a different one. That wasn't Premier Guitar. That was Matt Blackett. That was pretty cool. He that was a little different subject. This is
Oh, okay.
in Premier Guitar. This is the speaker. It's a monthly series, Speaker Geeks.
Oh, okay, cool.
Where me and two other writers just get crazy deep into speakerology. It's a lot of fun.
Very cool. Definitely check it out. I'll put all this information in
Right.
the below information stuff, so you guys can have links to Steve's company and his article and all that stuff. So I'll put all that stuff in there.
Thank you very much for that, tolerating my blathering for 3 hours. Actually, that went fast, and it was a lot of fun, Dave. That was really great.
Yeah, no, it's great. And
Awesome.
if any of you guys out there also haven't, please subscribe.
Yes.
Tone-talk.com, and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can keep an eye on what we're doing. We're going to do a lot of cool things in the future, so please subscribe.
Yes. Hit the bell. Hit the subscribe button. All right, guys. Have a great night. You two stay around while we hang up. Everybody have a great night. Enjoy your weekend. Talk to you later.